Chapter 2666. She was actually able to keep her composure, and didn't reveal any clues at all. Rongyue Tianlan didn't make many mistakes. His fiancée was actually an anomaly. Rongyue Tianlan's eyes flashed with interest. He tapped the handle of his fan against his palm. Originally, he had planned to leave after explaining everything clearly. He wasn't afraid that the South Heaven Emperor would hold him back. Since he came back, he naturally had a way to force him to cancel the engagement. But now, he didn't want to leave for the time being. He wanted to see how Princess Ji Shun Yu would deal with this situation. Everyone was questioning the origin of this flower. No one believed that Ji Shun Yu picked this flower herself. Even the South Heaven Emperor didn't believe it. In his eyes, his daughter definitely didn't have this ability. Among them, Chang Bubai was the one who questioned the loudest. He was just short of pointing at Ji Shun Yu's nose and accusing her of lying. Ji Shun Yu listened without saying a word. Only when the questioning voices gradually stopped did she turn to look at Chang Bubai. She didn't try to explain the origin of the flower. Instead, she said directly, "Let's put this flower aside for now. We still have a bet to complete. Let's fight first." "Chang Bubai, are you sure you want to fight me?" Ji Shun Yu casually rolled up her sleeves and replied, "Nonsense." As she spoke, she slowly tied one of her arms to her waist. Chang Bubai was confused. "What are you doing?" Ji Shun Yu glanced at him. Chang Bubai, a spell master in the Sanskrit continent. Rank 36th. Specializes in earth element attacks. Li Fire Hook. This time, not only was Chang Bubai stunned, everyone else present was also stunned. Because what Ji Shun Yu recited was Chang Bubai's resume. It could be said that it was exactly the same. How could a delicate princess know about this? Chang Bubai didn't know what to feel. So the princess knows me so well. Then you. Since she knew his reputation, she still dared to fight him? There were many experts in the Sanskrit continent. To be able to rank 36th was definitely an expert among experts. He was an awesome person who could tear down a palace with a wave of his hand. Ji Shun Yu said indifferently, "Seeing that you are ranked 36th, you can barely fight me. However, you are not worth my 2 hands, 1 hand is enough." In the hall, there was the sound of a wine glass falling to the ground. Some people who were mentally weak were shocked by her big words. Chang Bubai's face was green and white. Ji Shun Yu's words were like slaps to his face, insulting his character as an expert. He was so angry that he laughed. "Princess, are you tired of living? Or do you think that this young master has a tender heart for the fairer sex and can't bear to hit you?" Ji Shun Yu raised an eyebrow. "Do you not understand human language? What's the point of talking so much? Whether it works or not, we'll see." This princess was really not a normal kind of straightforward. His words were direct and spicy enough. Compared to her incomparably beautiful appearance, they were 2 extremes. Rongyue Tian couldn't help but smile. He raised his hand, and a gambling table appeared in front of him. There were all kinds of chips on it. Everyone looked at him in confusion, not knowing what he was going to do. However, he flicked his sleeves. It's rare to encounter such a grand event. "Everyone, let's make a bet, and see whose vision is more accurate." After he finished speaking, he placed his landscape fan and a blood coral jade pendant on his waist on the table. "I bet that the princess will win. Who wants to bet with me?" Chapter 2667. Everyone. Everyone couldn't understand what was going on in the 8th prince's head. This dispute had started because he had cancelled the engagement. Now that he had duped them into fighting, he was just a spectator? And he was still in the mood to gamble. The South Heaven's Arch also looked at Rongyue Tianlan with a complicated expression. He probably didn't expect him to do this, and even bet on his own daughter. What was the 8th Highness thinking? Could it be that he regretted seeing Shun Yu's beauty? So he was using this to appease Shun Yu? The South Heaven's Arch couldn't guess what the 8th prince was thinking, and the others couldn't either. However, everyone was still very interested in this bet, and placed their bets. Of course, everyone still favored Chang Bubai. After all, he was very famous in the Sanning continent, and could do whatever he wanted. As for Ji Shun Yu, she didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, and was just boasting. The 8th prince might be thinking of compensating the beauty, but the others didn't think so. Most of them placed their bets on Chang Bubai. Only a few people were willing to take a gamble and bet on Ji Xinyu, of course. In order to avoid losing everything, they placed a very small bet. Thus, on the gambling table, the bets on Ji Xinyu's side were very small, while the bets on Chang Bubai's side were piled up into a small mountain. The South Heaven Arch felt that this was too unsightly, so he took out a few precious jewels and placed them on his daughter's side. Even though he didn't favor his daughter, he couldn't lose in front of others. At this point, Chang Bubai had no choice but to make a move. He said with a cold expression, "If I win, I also want a prize." "Speak." Ji Xinyu was already a bit impatient. Chang Bubai stared at her face. "If I win in 10 moves, you have to take off your veil." He had been curious about her appearance for a long time. This woman's eyes, skin, and figure were all very good. What if her nose and mouth were all crooked? Ji Xinyu didn't care and smiled. "Then you'll be at a disadvantage. How about this? I'll be more generous. If I can't win in 10 moves with one hand, I'll admit defeat. I'll accept any punishment." Chang Bubai. This princess's boasting was simply going to break the heavens. Even the current #1 expert of the Fanning continent wouldn't dare to say that. However, his reputation was extremely resounding. His large blade swept through the world and was unrivaled. 10 years ago, Chang Bubai had suffered defeat at his hands. However, at that time, he had also endured more than 50 moves before being defeated. Chang Bubai coldly smiled and no longer spoke nonsense. He already wanted to teach this princess a lesson in blood. He wanted her to know that even if she was bragging, she still had to pay the price. After all, they were all cultivators. The banquet in the hall was quickly moved away, clearing out a large area. Everyone automatically stood outside the circle, waiting to watch the show. Chang Bubai still had the strength of a martial artist. He cupped his hands towards Ji Xinyu and said, "Please make the first move." Ji Xinyu stood there lazily, not intending to make the first move. "No need, you can do whatever you want." This kind of blatant disdain made Chang Bubai's heart burn with anger. Placing his palms together, he immediately made his move. Chapter 2668. The historical records of the Nantian clan later recorded this as follows. Chang Bubai, one of the 36 masters of the Brahma continent, fought with Princess Ji Xinyu at Langda Hall in the 18,000th year of the Brahma calendar. Ji Xinyu faced the enemy with one hand and defeated Chang Bubai in 5 moves. Chang Bubai lost one hand and one leg. The hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Chang Bubai stood there with one leg, his head covered in sweat, and his face pale. He looked at Ji Xinyu in disbelief. Everyone else was also stunned, looking at Ji Xinyu as if she was a monster. Rongyu Tianlan was not surprised at all. He had seen Ji Xinyu's martial arts, and he could understand Chang Bubai's martial arts with just a glance. In the silence, he calmly put away his fan and jade pendant, then calmly distributed the things he had just won according to the amount of the bet. He slowly said, "I won." He then pulled out a large pile of spoils for the Nantian Arch. "Your Majesty, keep them well." Nantian Arch. The other people who had won felt like they were in a dream. They had been afraid that they had bet too much, but now they were regretting that they had bet too little. However, this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that this princess had won. It turned out that this princess was not only as beautiful as a flower, but also had such profound martial arts. She was stronger than all the men present. Many people were so shocked that their mouths formed a circle. They rubbed their eyes again and again, almost unable to believe their eyes. Impossible. How could she have such profound martial arts? She must be cultivating some sorcery. I have never seen the moves she used just now. They are also not the martial arts of the Purple Cloud sect. Someone finally could not help but cry out. "It's not sorcery." Chang Bubai finally spoke slowly. He had fought with Ji Xinyu directly. Although he had never seen the martial arts she used, they did not have the slightest bit of sorcery. The bones in one of his hands and one of his legs were broken and twisted at strange angles. The pain of the broken bones penetrated his marrow. Chang Bubai's face was covered in cold sweat. Although his words were harsh, he was a man of his words. "I am willing to accept my loss. Princess is the true expert. I admire you." He might have been a little lenient when he made his first move, but after suffering a great loss, he began to go all out. Even after going all out, the result was still the same. What else could he say? With a plop, he knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Ji Xinyue 8 times. This was the bet, and he had to fulfill it. The stronger a person's martial arts was, the more they worshipped the strong, and Changbu Bai was no exception. He was now wholeheartedly convinced of Ji Xinyue's martial arts, and his kowtowing was not exaggerated at all. But to bark like a dog, he paused for a moment, his face turning red. Just as he was about to imitate her, Ji Xinyue waved her hand. Killing someone is just a matter of nodding your head to the ground. A hero can be killed, but not humiliated. Seeing that you're a man, forget about imitating a dog. Changbu Bai's eyes lit up. His eyes filled with gratitude as he bowed deeply towards Ji Xinyue. Many thanks, princess. His attitude was respectful, and he no longer treated Ji Xinyue as a woman, but as a martial arts master, completely different from before. Ji Xinyue said indifferently, "No need to be so polite. In the future, don't look down on women, and don't follow what others say, to avoid being used as a tool by people with ulterior motives." Changbu Bai choked and then bowed again. "I have learned from your teachings. I know my mistake. Princess's breadth of mind is no less than a man's. I admire you. In the future, if your highness has any errands, please tell me. This Chang will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire." Chapter 2669. Ji Xinyue nodded slightly and ignored him. She swept her gaze across the crowd and said, "Now, is there anyone else who doubts the origin of this flower? Who would doubt her now that she had shown this?" It was obvious that the flower had just been picked. It was clear that Princess Ji Xinyue had indeed just rushed back. She wasn't hiding in the palace in order to not break off the engagement like everyone had guessed. Such an outstanding appearance, such profound and exquisite martial arts. This woman was simply a legend. She had broken everyone's common understanding of women. Such an outstanding girl was actually rumored to be so unbearable. Indeed, rumors were the most untrustworthy. Those who had said all sorts of bad things about Ji Xinyue and looked down on her lowered their heads, not daring to say anything else. As for those unmarried young men, their gazes towards Ji Xinyue became complicated. Some admired, some adored, some envied, and some were eager to try, and the South Heaven Emperor was simply elated. This daughter had given him too much of a surprise and made him proud. He did not expect his daughter's martial arts to be so powerful. Even if she was not the #1 expert on the continent, she was at least #2, definitely first class. He thought that his daughter only liked to play with swords and sticks. Even if she was strong, it would only be a little better than flowery martial arts, so he did not take it to heart. He remembered that when his daughter had just returned from her studies, she was eager to get his approval and jumped in front of him, excitedly wanting to show him a swordsmanship. At that time, he happened to be annoyed by those rumors, so he scolded her right in her face then. Then his daughter's bright eyes dimmed, and she slowly retreated. From then on, she did not mention anything about her martial arts. She left home for the first time in 500 years, and only stayed for 3 days before leaving. After all, she was once a princess who was doted on by her parents, so she still loved her family. In the few years after she finished her studies, she would still return home for a few days every year. But the South Heaven Emperor was also strange. After his daughter left home, he regretted it. But when he saw her, he was angry and could not help but scold her and give her the cold shoulder. Every time he saw her, he did not have a good expression. Empress Lu Xian followed her husband's footsteps. Although she did not scold her, she often advised her to act like a lady from a noble family and practice more needlework. As a result, the frequency of his daughter coming home became less and less. From 2 or 3 times a year to once a year, once every 5 years, once every 10 years. Especially after Ji Tianyue was born, the South Heaven Emperor doted on her even more than he did her in the past. Gradually, she only returned home once every 100 years. He actually knew very little about this daughter that he once loved the most. Naturally, he didn't know what level his daughter's martial arts had reached. It turned out that his daughter was so outstanding. His heart was filled with regret, but of course, he was overjoyed and proud at the moment. He swept away his previous gloominess and said with a face full of smiles, "Good daughter, it's rare for you to have such filial piety. Later, you can personally deliver it to your mother." His gaze turned to Rongyue Tianlan, who was standing at the side. This time, he was much more confident. "Tianlan, this is Shenyu. You've seen her strength, haven't you? Then this marriage No matter how outstanding Ji Shenyu was, the South Heavenly Emperor still wanted this marriage to go through. Chapter 2670. After all, this was a matter that involved the two clans. In some matters, the Southern Sky Clan still had to rely on the Eastern Sky Clan's support. It could be said that their marriage was not just a matter between two children, but also involved their country and the world. Therefore, even if the Southern Sky Emperor was humble, he did not want to cancel this marriage. Moreover, Rongyue Tianlan was so outstanding. Such a son-in-law could not be found even with a string of night pearls, let alone with a lantern. The Southern Sky Emperor naturally did not want to give up. Originally, he felt that his daughter had a lot of problems, and was not good enough to force Rongyue Tianlan to marry her. He also felt that he had let him down. Now, he felt that his back was firm, full of confidence. His daughter was so outstanding. She was worthy of this Eighth Highness, right? Could it be that he wanted to cancel the marriage after seeing such an outstanding fiancé? Rongyue Tianlan's folding fan paused slightly. Before he could speak, Ji Shenyu spoke first. "Let's forget about this marriage, I'll cancel it." Her voice was clear and crisp, like a pearl falling on a jade plate. It clearly rang throughout the hall, causing the hall that had just regained its liveliness to instantly quiet down. All eyes fell on Ji Shenyu. Shock, surprise, disbelief, suspicion, all kinds of gazes intersected. The Southern Sky Emperor was holding a cup of wine in his hand. At this moment, the wine cup fell to the ground. Shenyu. Rongyue Tianlan did not have much of a reaction. He held the folding fan and looked at her, casually tapping the fan handle in his palm. The smile on his lips did not change, but instead widened a little. He slowly said, "Princess Shenyu also wants to cancel the marriage?" Ji Shenyu's gaze finally turned to him. Her eyes were as clear as a lake, but she still looked at him, as if she was looking at a cloud. "This marriage is not consensual. Your Excellency and I are not the same kind of people, so there is no meaning in forcing ourselves to be tied together. When this marriage was first arranged, this princess was still young and could not resist. Although your Excellency was already an adult at that time, you did not have much responsibility. Instead, you did not fight for it, and instead fled, causing this marriage to be delayed until now. Now it is time to cancel this wrong marriage." Her words were sharp enough, and straightforward enough, sonorous and powerful. It was transmitted to the ears of everyone present. Her voice was not loud, but it shook everyone's emotions. No one would have thought that this Princess Shenyu would actually say such words in front of Rongyue Tianlan. It was simply the most beautiful counterattack to his action of breaking off the engagement just now. Chang Bubai couldn't help but clap and give Ji Shenyu a thumbs up. Well said. While everyone cheered for Ji Shenyu in their hearts, they all looked towards Rongyue Tianlan. He wanted to see how this proud son of heaven would react. Would he fly into a rage out of embarrassment? Rongyue Tianlan looked at her with a pair of sparkling eyes. Not only did she not fly into a rage out of humiliation, the corners of her beautiful lips even curled up as she said generously, "Princess is right. Previously, it was indeed Tianlan's fault. Tianlan apologizes to Princess here." She rolled up her sleeves and bowed to Ji Shenyu. Under his usually warm appearance, he was actually a sloppy, lazy, and casual person. However, his current appearance revealed a true seriousness, and the pair of eyes that looked at Ji Shenyu revealed a true apology and guilt. It was very obvious that his apology was very sincere, and was not just putting on an act. Ji Shenyu's personality was to be amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. If Rongyue Tianlan used her status to suppress her at this time, or argued with her harshly, she would not be afraid. Chapter 2671. Ji Shenyu was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. If Rongyue Tianlan were to use his status to suppress her or argue with her, she would not be afraid. At most, she would have a big fight with him. No matter who won or lost, it was not worth it. She had even prepared a lot of excuses to refute him in her heart. But he was sincerely apologizing, which made the anger that she had been suppressing dissipate by quite a bit. Since the other party was sincerely apologizing, she did not need to be unreasonable. So she coughed lightly and said, "No need to be so polite. Maybe you had your difficulties back then. Forget it. Let's not bother about the past." The past was the past. Even if she pursued it, she could not get the past back. If it was 5 years ago, if she encountered today's incident, she might not have let it go so easily. She would definitely make Rongyue Tianlan give her an explanation. But ever since she was saved by that mysterious person, it was as if she had an epiphany. Her thinking had risen by several levels. For example, right now, she was actually able to let go of things that would have been unforgivable in the past. The other party just bowed, and she forgave him. She did not bother about it. Rongyue Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief. "Princess is indeed righteous. Tianlan admires you." "Well said, well said." Ji Xinyu waved her hand. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her and smiled again. "Actually, Princess and I feel like old friends at first sight. What's even rarer is that we are of the same mind." Ji Xinyu raised her eyebrows and looked at him. "Of the same mind?" Rongyue Tianlan smiled like a spring breeze. "Yes, I have the intention to cancel the engagement. Princess also has the intention to cancel the engagement. Aren't we of the same mind?" Originally, everyone looked at them as if they were smiling at each other and sympathized with each other. They thought that they regretted not knowing each other earlier, and that they would not mention the matter of breaking off the engagement again. However, they did not expect Rongyue Tianlan to bring it up again. It seemed that even the outstanding Ji Xinyu could not really move the heart of the 8th prince. This engagement was definitely cancelled. Everyone's bright eyes looked at Ji Xinyu again. Some people who had many thoughts and liked to make guesses about people even thought that Ji Xinyu was just playing hard to get. But now that trick had failed, Ji Xinyu smiled as well. Her smile was bright, and her eyelashes curved like crescent moons. Like a brother, she patted Rongyue Tianlan's shoulder and said, "Not bad. In this regard, we are of the same mind. Let's have a toast." After all, she was used to disguising herself as a man in the pugilistic world. And she had also made some friends in the pugilistic world. Some of her actions had become deep-rooted habits. Now that she had gotten rid of this big trouble, she was actually quite happy in her heart. She had accidentally revealed her usual behavior. After this slap, she saw Rongyue Tianlan's slightly playful eyes, and everyone's shocked expression, as if they had been struck by lightning. Only then did she realize what she had done. She coughed and retracted her hand, regaining her princess-like demeanor. "Right. Since we've all agreed to cancel the engagement, let's act as soon as possible. Tomorrow, we'll head to the Sanskrit totem marriage pillar to settle this matter." Rongyue Tian was speechless. She didn't expect her to be more impatient than herself. Could it be that she already had someone she liked? Was it really what she wanted when she came to cancel the engagement? This way, the guilt in his heart would be much less. Rongyue Tianlan felt that she should be relieved. Chapter 2672. Rongyue Tianlan felt that he should heave a sigh of relief. But seeing how anxious Ji Xinyu was, he suddenly felt a little upset. Of course, this uncomfortable feeling only flashed past his heart. Even he did not notice it. He raised his head and was about to answer her when he suddenly saw her face. He took a step forward and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Ji Xinyu did not know when, but her face was as beautiful as a flower that had just bloomed. Logically speaking, she should have felt her cheeks burning, but she did not feel anything at all. When Rongyue Tianlan took a step forward, she took a step back and said, "What do you mean?" Before she could finish her sentence, her vision suddenly turned black, and she fell forward involuntarily. Rongyue Tianlan was already prepared and raised his arms to catch her. There was a faint fragrance of cold plum on his body. Ji Xinyu fell into his arms. She was originally dizzy and could not find her way, but when she suddenly smelled the fragrance on his body, her body stiffened slightly. She suddenly felt an inexplicable repulsion in her heart. She forced herself to raise her hand to push him away and said, "You, let go of me. Men and women should not touch each other." She did not have much strength in her hands now, so pushing him was no different from pushing a kitten. Rong Yuishenlin simply carried her up and said indifferently, "Although you and I want to break off the engagement, it is not done yet. Since it is not done, I am now your fiancé, so what's wrong with hugging? The rule of men and women not touching each other does not apply to you and me." Ji Shenyue had never been hugged like this since she became an adult. In other words, other than when she was a child, she had never been hugged by anyone else. At this moment, lying in Rong Yuishenlin's arms, she was very uncomfortable. She wanted to push him away, but her vision turned black and her hands and feet were weak, unable to exert any strength. She was shocked and asked, What did you do to me?" Rong Yuishenlin looked down at her and asked, "What can I do to you?" "Then why did I? You were poisoned." Rong Yuishenlin's voice was cold. "The fire dragon's poison should have been caused when you were picking herbs." Ji Shenyue was still half convinced. I was only scratched by its claws a few times. Shouldn't the fire dragon's poison be in its mouth?" She heard that one would only be poisoned after being bitten by the fire dragon. So when she was fighting with the fire dragon, she had been guarding its mouth. Rong Yuishenlin. He didn't say anything else as he carried her out in large strides. At the same time, he asked the dumbfounded South Heaven Emperor, "Report the location of her palace." The South Heaven's Arch did not react for a moment. Her bedchamber. "She's not in the palace all year round, so we didn't prepare anything for her." Rong Yuetian abruptly turned her head. "Nantian Palace is so big, yet it doesn't even have a place for her." It was rare to see such a stern expression on his face, but it actually made everyone's heart quiver. Rong Yuetianlan only had one purpose in coming to the Fanning continent, and that was to break off the engagement. Therefore, he had always kept a low profile and restrained his sharpness. He had always appeared gentle and elegant, like a harmless noble young master. At this moment he was enraged, and he no longer suppressed his aura as an exalted immortal. The immortal cultivation world had always been like this. High-level cultivators had a natural kind of pressure. Even if they didn't speak, they could still make low-level cultivators tremble in fear. What's more, Rong Yuetian had the aura of an absolute superior. Even if he didn't flare up, no one would dare to act rashly in front of him. Chapter 2673. At this moment in his anger, his aura was fully released, causing the temperature of the entire hall to drop by 10 degrees. The South Sky Emperor was also in a high position for a long time, but under the pressure of his aura, he couldn't even raise his head. Being questioned by him, he panicked. Every time she comes back, she sleeps with the Empress. Before Ji Shenyue was 500 years old, she had her own palace. Later on, she was sent away to learn martial arts, and after 500 years, Ji Shenluo took a fancy to her palace. He cried and acted spoiled, insisting on staying in that palace. The South Sky Emperor's heart softened, and he agreed, letting Ji Shenluo happily move in. According to the South Sky Emperor's thoughts, when Ji Shenyu finished her studies, he would return it to her. But he didn't expect that after 500 years, although Ji Shenyu became more cheerful, her temperament became more eccentric. When she saw that her palace was occupied by someone else, she was angry. She immediately forced Ji Shenluo to move out. At that time, Ji Shenluo didn't want to move out, crying and saying that he had grown attached to the palace. He begged father to arrange another palace for Ji Shenyu. The South Sky Emperor had a headache from his eldest daughter's quarrel, so he ordered another palace for Ji Shenyu. Unexpectedly, after Ji Shenyu heard his order, she looked at him in disbelief for a long time. The South Sky Emperor's hair stood on end. Before he could say anything, Ji Shenyu sneered and left. After a few years, when she came back, she would live in the Empress Palace. Usually, she would stay for 2 or 3 days, and she didn't need the South Sky Emperor to prepare another palace for her. After Ji Shenluo got married, the palace was empty again. When Ji Shenyu came back, the South Sky Emperor told her that she could live in her own palace. But he didn't expect Ji Shenyu to just spit out 2 words. It's dirty. She refused to step into the palace again. The South Sky Emperor felt that this daughter was too difficult to serve, and was a bit angry, so he didn't care about her anymore. So it was delayed until now. Now, Ji Xinyu didn't even have her own palace. In the entire Brahma continent, there was no princess who didn't have her own palace. Even if it was a small vassal state, the princess's rooms would still be magnificent and incomparably noble. Rongyi Yuishinlin looked at the woman in her arms, and her heart sank slightly. How did she, the princess of a country, end up like this? Rong Yuishinlin thought of the rumors about her that were circulating in various countries, and her heart felt like it was weighed down by a weight. This marriage had brought her more disaster than he had imagined. The South Sky Emperor also realized that this was too unreasonable and hurriedly said, "She actually has a palace. But because she isn't in the palace often, her little sister is living there now. You can let her little sister move out first." Rong Yuetian glanced at him. That gaze was as cold as ice, causing the South Heaven Emperor's heart to tremble again. Rong Yuishinlin's cold voice sounded, "No need. Let's prepare a quiet room first. The poison in her body must be removed immediately." He carried her and strode out. The people in the hall looked at each other. Everyone was confused. They didn't know what was going on. His Highness the 8th Prince had clearly come to cancel the engagement, but his concern for this girl was not ordinary. The efficiency of the South Sky Emperor's subordinates was quite high, and they quickly prepared a quiet room. Those maids and attendants were preparing to clean up, and Rong Yuishinlin walked in with the princess in his arms. His aura was too strong, and he was too handsome. At this moment he was carrying their princess. This made those maids stare at him, and they were so nervous that they didn't know where to put their hands and feet. Chapter 2674. Get out! Rongyue Tianlan's voice was cold. The South Sky Emperor who followed behind quickly said, "This quiet room hasn't been cleaned for a few days. Let them clean it up. Don't worry, they are quick very soon." He shut his mouth before he could finish his words, because this 8th Highness just waved his sleeves, and after a faint blue light flashed, the entire room seemed to have been cleaned by water. Not a speck of dust was left. Rongyue Tianlan didn't stop walking, and put her on the bed in the quiet room. Usually, when a girl was poisoned, her body was weak, and she was carried by a man. Under normal circumstances, she would faint, and when she woke up, she would find that the wounds on her body had been treated. That would be more dramatic, and not too embarrassing. However, Ji Xinyu's nerves had always been very strong. She was clearly very dizzy, her vision was very blurry, and her body was very weak, but her mind couldn't be any clearer. She clearly felt that Rongyue Tianlan had been carrying her, and even if she didn't want to, she couldn't break free. His embrace was very warm, and the faintly discernible fragrance on his body had been dense at the tip of her nose, making her irritable for no reason. She even suspected that the fragrance on his body actually had a refreshing effect. She had been disguised as a man for many years. Although she was open-minded and often drank and ate meat with men, and went on adventures to fight monsters, she understood that she was a girl, and she still paid attention to the distance between her and those people, trying to minimize physical contact as much as possible. At most she would pat on the shoulder or the back. But now, she was being carried in a man's arms. This feeling of her body floating in the air and completely handing her weight to another person was very uncomfortable, and she felt very insecure. It made her body stiff from the beginning to the end. Until Rongyue Tianlan put her on the bed, she secretly sighed in relief. Her body moved, and she wanted to sit up subconsciously. A hand was placed on her shoulder, and Rongyue Tianlan leaned over to look at her. "Don't move." Ji Xinyu looked at him warily, her eyes wide open. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her appearance, and his mind was slightly shaken. He vaguely felt that he had seen her like this before, but he couldn't remember where. She looked like a little girl now. Rongyue Tianlan softened his voice. "Don't be afraid, I will cure you." Only then did the South Sky Emperor interrupt. "I have already called the Imperial Doctor. He will be here in a cup of tea's time." "No need. The fire dragon poison cannot be treated by ordinary Imperial physicians. You go out and send someone to guard this place. Before I leave, Don't let anyone enter this place. Rongyue Tianlan ordered. The South Heaven's Arch was stunned. Eighth Highness is proficient in medicine. I remember that you didn't understand this 3,000 years ago. Just because I didn't understand it 3,000 years ago, doesn't mean I won't understand it 3,000 years later. If you continue to nag and delay the treatment of her, I'm afraid that her skills will be completely crippled before she can serve you. Rong Juishan's voice turned cold. At this point, the South Sky Emperor couldn't say anything else. He looked at the two people lying on the bed, and suddenly had an idea. All right, then I'll have to trouble your Highness 8th Prince to take care of my daughter. I'll go arrange it now. He turned around and strode out. Only the two of them were left in the large quiet room. Ji Xinyu's hair stood on end. It wasn't that she had never been alone with a man before, but that was only when her skills were extremely high, and she could protect herself. Now, although her mind was clear now, she was still conscious. Chapter 2675. Although she was conscious now, her body was extremely weak. All her skills seemed to have disappeared, and her hands and feet were as limp as mud. Rongyue Tianlan was sitting right beside her, which made her extremely nervous. Rongyue Tianlan looked down at her, who was like a little hedgehog, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. Afraid of me? Ji Shenyu pursed her lips, her eyes full of caution. Rongyue Tianlan sighed. Your vigilance is unreasonable. I came here this time to break off the engagement with you. If I wanted to do anything to you, why would I break off the engagement? He touched her forehead with one hand and said seriously, So, don't think too much. I just want to treat your illness. These words were obviously comforting, but it was also a little hurtful. Ji Shenyu did not buy it. I can actually treat this injury myself. You don't have to worry about it. Huh. Rongyue Tianlan raised his eyebrows and withdrew his hand. Really? Of course. I often treat my own injuries. I'm very skilled. Ji Shenyu replied proudly. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her proud little face and nodded. If that's the case, very good. Then get up and try to treat the scratch on your calf. He stepped back and looked at her with his arms crossed, as if he was going to watch from the sidelines. She could treat it herself. She was an expert at it. Because Ji Shenyu often practiced martial arts, it was inevitable that she would often get injured. She was the only female disciple in her sect, so when she got injured, she learned to treat it herself and would not ask others to do it. After completing her apprenticeship, she walked the Jianghu and suffered countless injuries. Naturally, it was not convenient for her to ask others to treat it for her, so she did it herself. Over time, she had become an expert at bandaging wounds. She could even bend her arm and treat the wounds on her back herself. Her independence was not ordinary. Now, she only suffered a claw wound on her calf, thigh, stomach, and collarbone. The wound was only scratched by the tip of the claw. It was not more than half an inch deep. She also sealed her acupoints in time to stop the bleeding, so this injury was nothing to her. As for the weakness in her body, it was probably because she used too much energy fighting the fire dragon and used the blink technique to rush. She would be fine as long as she had a good rest. She was well aware of her own injuries. They were not as serious as what Rongyue Tianlan had said. She took a light breath and slowly sat up by the side of the bed. Her body was too weak. Just this movement made her sweat profusely, and the wounds on her body that were no longer painful began to burn. She endured the pain and leaned her back against the railing of the bed. Her fingers touched her trousers, and she looked at Rongyue Tianlan, who was not far away. He was looking at her with bright eyes. Can you go out? She had some injuries on her body that were not suitable for men to see. No, Rongyue Tian answered straightforwardly. Ji Shenyu. Why? I'm afraid that after I go out, you'll faint from fright, and I won't be able to save you in time. Rongyue Shenlin simply found a chair and sat down. With a swoosh, she opened her folding fan and shook it twice. Ji Shenyu. Faint from fright? Did he think that she was a delicate young mistress? What kind of wounds had she not seen in her life? She had even seen disemboweled people. Ji Shenyu was too lazy to argue with him. She raised her hand and pulled up her trousers. She decided to treat the wound on her calf first, and let him see that she could handle it well on her own. She pulled up the loose trousers neatly, and then she stared. Chapter 2676. Her calf was hit by the fire dragon's claw, leaving a half-foot long and half-inch deep wound. But now, the wound had disappeared, and was replaced by a layer of red scales that covered the surface of her wound. She instantly had goosebumps all over her body. Although she was brave, she had trypophobia. At this moment, when she saw the dense scales, her scalp exploded, and her originally morbidly bright red face turned snow-white in an instant. She was already very weak, and she forced herself to sit there, but after being frightened, her vision turned black, and she leaned back. Behind her was the hard headboard, and if she leaned back like this, the back of her head would definitely make a sound, and she might even faint. The moment she leaned back, she was mentally prepared for the pain at the back of her head, but she didn't expect that she didn't feel any pain, even when she was lying on the ground. The ground was not hard, and it was very soft with a faint plum fragrance. A faint voice sounded in her ear. "Fortunately, I have foresight." Ji Xinyue raised her head stiffly, and met Rongyi Yuishinlin's sparkling eyes. This person was still sitting on the chair just now, but in the blink of an eye, he teleported to the front of her bed and caught her with one arm, and she was lying in the crook of his arm at the moment. Ji Xinyue didn't even see his afterimage when he teleported. This skill. Rongyi Yuishinlin placed her safely on the pillow and asked her slowly, "Are you frightened?" More than frightened, she was almost scared to death. Although Ji Xinyue was always calm, her voice trembled at this moment. How did I grow scales?" "On the other wounds." She tried to feel it, but she only felt an itch, exactly the same as the feeling on her leg. If her whole body was covered with such disgusting scales, Ji Xinyue's forehead was covered in a layer of cold sweat. Rongyi Yuishinlin looked at her, and didn't have the heart to hurt her, but he still told her the truth. The wounds are the same. The scales on the other wounds are only more, not less. This time, not only was there cold sweat on Ji Xinyue's forehead, her whole body was sweating, and her face was even paler. "How did I get these scales?" Rongyi Yuishinlin said indifferently. "That fire dragon's teeth are indeed the most poisonous, but its claws also have a kind of poison. When you were scratched by it, if you applied the antidote in time and meditated for an hour, you would be able to get rid of the poison completely. But you wanted to be brave, and immediately used the 1,000 miles in a breath technique after being injured. So the poison went directly into your skin, and the scales grew." This person was very experienced and knowledgeable. He actually saw that she used the 1,000 miles in a breath technique. It seemed that not only was his martial arts abnormal, but also his eyesight was also abnormal. "How do you treat this wound? Can the scales be removed?" Ji Xinyue stared at him anxiously. From his tone, he should be able to the wound. He should be able? The scales should also be removed, right? Rongyi Yuishinlin sighed. "It's a little difficult." Ji Xinyue's heart sank. She raised her eyes to look at him. "What do you mean? You mean you can't treat it either? Then what you said to my father just now. It's easy to save your life and even preserve your martial arts, but it's quite difficult to completely remove these scales." Rongyi Yuishinlin interrupted her to explain. She had to carry these scales for the rest of her life? Perhaps it was because of that special environment, but Ji Xinyue had actually given up on herself deep down, and didn't care much about her body. Chapter 2677. When she was injured, she only needed to bandage it so that it wouldn't bleed or fester. As long as it healed, it would be over. Therefore, there were many scars on her body, which were not as smooth and delicate as her little face. Now adding a few scales to those scars was nothing. At most, people would gossip about her being a monster, which was not worth much. The only thing that she couldn't stand was the numbness in her scalp when she looked at these scales. Maybe it would be fine after she got used to it. Anyway, it was hidden in her clothes, and only she could see it in the future. She would just look at it less. Therefore, when she heard Rongyu Tianlan's words, she heaved a sigh of relief. "It's good that I can keep my martial arts." With martial arts, she could protect herself. Rongyu Tianlan choked. He looked at her and asked, "You don't care about these scales? Didn't all girls like to be beautiful? If there was a cut on her body, it would be like the sky was falling." Why did she? Ji Shenhua was calm and collected. I care. But it can't be helped if it's not easy to remove, right? Leaving these scales. It's just a little ugly. Anyway, no one will see it. I won't look at these places in the future. Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. He chuckled. How can no one see it? In the future, won't your husband be able to? He paused. If he continued, it would seem frivolous. Moreover, he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Ji Shenhua closed her eyes. Worry about it tomorrow. That husband might still be in my mother's belly. What's the point of being so calculative now? She had already made up her mind. After breaking off this engagement, she would be truly free. In the future, she would walk freely in the Jianghu, without any intention of marrying. Anyway, she wouldn't go home easily. Her parents couldn't force her to marry, even if they wanted to. Living alone was actually quite good. She could eat her fill, and the whole family wouldn't be hungry. She didn't have to worry about this and that. She felt that this idea was quite good, and intended to carry it out to the end. However, she didn't intend to share this idea with Rongyue Tianlan. Otherwise, he might think that she didn't want to marry in the future, because she was hurt by him. She wanted to be a chaste woman for him for the rest of her life. Therefore she casually said this. Her tone was unusually free and easy. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her indifferent look, and did not know why there was anger in his heart. He did not say anything, but suddenly raised his hand and rolled up half of her trousers. His movements were so fast that Ji Shenhua felt a chill on her leg, and jumped in fright. She subconsciously retracted her leg. What are you doing? Rongyue Tian's gaze fell on half of her leg, and the smile on her lips turned cold. Her skin was actually very good, white and tender. Her legs were also very good-looking, straight and slender. However, on this leg, there were countless scars of various sizes. There were scratch marks, tear marks, sword marks, and even bite marks from wild beasts. Some of these scars were deep, some were shallow, some were deep, some were old, some were newly added. Layer upon layer, the large scars crushed the small scars. It was a ghastly sight. Rongyue Tianlan had treated at least 8,000 patients in her life, if not 10,000. But this was the first time she saw a girl with so many scars on her body. And this girl was his fiancée. What happened to these scars on your body? As he spoke, he rolled up the other leg of her trousers, and even rolled up her sleeves. Ji Shenhua wanted to resist, but she didn't have the strength. She could only watch as her limbs were exposed. Chapter 2678. There were many scars on her limbs. It was not beautiful at all. It could even be called ugly. However, these ugliness were all exposed in front of Rongyue Tianlan's eyes. She felt a little embarrassed and forced a smile. Scars are scars, what else could it be? It's ugly, right? Actually, the rumor that I'm ugly is not groundless. It's just that my face is still acceptable. Why didn't you treat your injuries properly? Rongyue Tianlan's voice was cold, angry that she did not know how to cherish her body. Ji Shenhua was stunned for a moment. I cherish my life very much. I did treat it properly. But sometimes the conditions don't allow it. When she was injured, she could only treat it herself. After all, the conditions were limited, and most of the time, she did not have time to treat her wounds properly. She could only bandage them briefly before going back into battle. By the time she had time and medicine, she had already missed the best treatment period, leaving behind scars of all sizes. As the saying goes, when there are too many lice, don't bite. When there are too many debts, don't worry. When there were more scars on her body, she did not care so much when she was injured again. Anyway, dozens of scars on her body were similar to 100 scars. They were all equally ugly. She was too lazy to torment herself when she was injured again. Now that her limbs were all exposed, Ji Shenhua saw the scales on her legs. Her calves were long, although half of her thighs were covered by her pants. A large part was still exposed. Her gaze tightened, and she quickly looked away. People with trypophobia could not afford to be hurt. Rongyue Tianlan was silent for a moment. Why is a princess like you working so hard? Can't you just stay in the palace? Ji Shenhua's expression was indifferent. I can't stay in the palace. There's no longer me in the palace. She paused. There's no place for you? Rongyue Tianlan continued for her. Ji Xinyue lowered her eyes and did not speak again. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her for a moment, raised his hand, and took out 2 green pills from nowhere, and put them near her lips. Eat them. Ji Xinyue knew that he would not harm her at this time, so she opened her mouth and swallowed the pills. A trace of coldness entered her throat and slid down her stomach. Rongyue Tianlan's palm pressed against her stomach. She was shocked and looked up at him, almost raising her hand to chop off his wolf claws. A girl's stomach was not for any man to touch. I'm just helping you circulate the medicinal energy. I don't have any other intentions. You said it yourself that your body is ugly. You still expect me to take advantage of you when you're so ugly? Even if you're willing, I'm not. Rongyue Tianlan's words were somewhat poisonous, causing Ji Xinyue to choke on her words. He looked like a straightforward doctor, so Ji Xinyue couldn't say anything else. His palms were warm, and a warm current flowed out from his palms. It flowed into a certain acupuncture point on her abdomen and circulated over and over again. Under the urging of his palm, the medicine gradually dissolved. Wisps of coolness flowed through her limbs and bones, gradually gathering at the wounds on her body, causing her wounds to heat up and swell. What are you doing? This was the first time Ji Xinyue had been treated like this, so she was very curious. To heal you. Rongyue Tianlan's words were concise and comprehensive. Ji Xinyue heaved a sigh of relief. After chatting for so long, he finally began to treat her injuries. So this was his healing method. It was indeed unique. She was still worried. Is my power all right? Can it still be the same as before? Of course. Rongyue Tianlan reassured her. Chapter 2679. Of course. Rongyue Tianlan reassured her, then looked at her again. You really don't care about the scales on your body? Rongyue Tianlan was a perfectionist. He felt that if such scales grew on his body, he would even have thoughts of suicide. He would rather treat the scales first, and then treat other injuries. Ji Xinyue paused. I care, but didn't you say it's quite difficult? I said it's difficult, but it doesn't mean there's no hope at all. Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. She was retreating too quickly. How difficult is it? Ji Xinyue was finally interested. You need me to treat you continuously for 318 days. It will also consume a lot of my spiritual medicine. Ji Xinyue was stunned for a moment, then blurted out. So long. I still want to recuperate and go to the marriage pillar with you the day after tomorrow to cancel the engagement. Then if I only recover my martial arts, will it take less time? Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. He said sinisterly. So you're in such a hurry. Don't worry, I'm also very anxious about this matter. But after all, I'm the one who wronged you first. Now that I'm treating you, just treat it as me returning the favor. Ji Xinyue felt that this Eighth Highness was indeed quite skilled in the field of medicine. 2 days ago, she was still lying on the bed listlessly, and when she got up, she would break out in a cold sweat. After this Eighth Highness treatment, she was actually able to jump around energetically in 2 days. And he was right. Her martial arts had returned to her body with the recovery of her strength. If Rongyue Tianlan hadn't forbidden her to use her martial arts these few days, she almost wanted to do a round of boxing every morning as usual. Perhaps Rongyue Tianlan's words that day were effective, or perhaps the South Heaven Emperor finally realized that this daughter was actually quite useful. He actually had someone build a magnificent courtyard for her in 2 days. It was bigger and more comfortable than any other princess courtyard. What was even rarer was that this courtyard was built beside a clear stream. As long as she walked out of the palace gate, she would be able to see the stream winding around her courtyard. There was a curved ancient bridge above the stream, and there were lively fishes swimming in the stream. Every flower, every blade of grass, every rock, and every pavilion in the courtyard was so ingenious. When Ji Xinyue was able to come out for a stroll, she walked around the courtyard inside and out. She deeply felt that her imperial father was also a person with a broad mind. No matter how she looked at it, everything here was like a landscape painting. Glazed roof tiles, green jade walls, coral trees, and all kinds of flowers and plants adorned the interior. Amidst the magnificence, there was a spiritual energy that made one feel refreshed. Ji Xinyue was actually someone who couldn't sit still. When she could move around freely, she wanted to go out for a stroll. Rong Yuetian didn't restrict her. She only told her that she couldn't use her skills or leave the palace in these 5 days. The rest was up to her. There were many halls in the imperial palace, especially in the imperial harem. Pavilions, terraces, and towers were all connected to each other. The South Heaven Emperor was a playboy and had many concubines. Almost every palace had a concubine. Ji Xinyu hadn't returned for too long and hadn't stayed in the imperial palace for too long. She didn't recognize any of these concubines. Previously, when she occasionally met these concubines, they either pretended not to see her or greeted her in a strange manner. Their relationship with Ji Xinyu was very ordinary, but this time, they seemed to have taken the wrong medicine. Chapter 2680. But this time, it was as if they had taken the wrong medicine. When they saw her, they frequently expressed their goodwill. Not only did they often send people to her palace to deliver things, they also warmly invited her to their palace as a guest. Ji Xinyu didn't like these social gatherings. When she was strolling around the imperial palace, she ran into a few concubines. After experiencing their enthusiasm, she didn't want to wander around the imperial palace, as she found it very boring. So after that, she only walked around her mother's place every day, paid her respects, and then went back. Because Rongyue Tianlan had to heal her every day, he also lived in the palace. Moreover, the place he lived was very close to her palace, only separated by a wall. Every time she went out, she had to pass by the entrance of his palace. Occasionally, she would take a look inside, and often see him doing some miscellaneous things inside. It was really some miscellaneous things. For example, he cultivated a piece of land to plant flowers and plants. For example, he fanned himself in front of a red clay stove to carefully brew tea. For example, he casually cut a piece of purple bamboo to make a bamboo flute and leisurely test the sound. For example, he set up a table to play chess. Speaking of chess, Ji Xinyu heard an allusion. It said that His Highness the 8th Prince's chess skills were not bad. He once excitedly found a chess master in the palace to play a few rounds. In the end, the chess master lost so badly that his pants almost fell off. In terms of chess skills, His Highness the 8th Prince was lonely because he could not find an opponent. In the end, he played with himself and found himself enjoying himself. After watching a few times, Ji Xinyu deeply felt that His Highness the 8th Prince was really not the same kind of person as her. His Highness the 8th Prince was a truly refined and cultured noble young master. He was a master in the 4 arts, planting flowers and brewing tea. He was a master in all of them. Wherever he sat, it would be an ink painting of mountains and rivers. Wherever he went, countless maids and concubines would stare at him with their eyes wide open. Their hearts would thump and ripple. Over the past few days, there would be maids and concubines passing by his palace from time to time for various reasons. Every time they pretended to pass by, they would sincerely look inside. If they saw him, they would blush. If they didn't see him, they would be disappointed. Ji Xinyu was even a little worried that those concubines would not be able to control themselves and go in to seduce His Highness the 8th Prince, making her father a cuckold. Honestly, she didn't care if her father was a cuckold or not. What she was worried about was if her imperial father found out about these things, would he go on a killing spree and kill her amorous stepmothers in a fit of rage? Fortunately, Rongyue Tianlan probably knew that he shouldn't touch the grass near his nest, so he acted as if he didn't see those concubines' expressions of goodwill. He completely ignored them, allowing Ji Xinyu to heave a sigh of relief. Compared to Rongyue Tianlan's excellence in all aspects, Ji Xinyu deeply felt that she was scum. Other than wielding swords and sticks, she didn't seem to know anything else. She didn't know anything about zither, chess, calligraphy, or painting, and her needlework was a complete mess. Although it was barely enough to grill a fish, it was barely edible. It couldn't be considered delicious. If it wasn't for that marriage contract, the two of them wouldn't be together at all. Therefore, annulling the engagement was the right thing to do. It was for the good of both of them. However, probably because Rongyue Tianlan had been soaking in her courtyard for the past few days to treat her injuries, There were some faint rumors spreading in the palace. Of course, this gossip was secretly spread. If it wasn't for Ji Xinyue's sharp ears as a martial arts practitioner, she wouldn't have known that this gossip could be so groundless. Chapter 2681. Of course, this gossip was secretly spread. If it wasn't for the fact that Ji Xinyue was a martial artist with sharp ears and accidentally overheard a few times, she really wouldn't have known that gossip could be so groundless and made up so well. Ji Xinyue was very impressed with the level of the person who made up the gossip and could directly write an opera book. The gossip went like this. At that time, Ji Xinyue was strolling in the back garden and saw a butterfly flying very long and handsome, so she wanted to catch it and play with it. Unexpectedly, the butterfly was very slippery and actually flew up and down like a wheel of fire. She couldn't use her martial arts, so after a few tries, she still couldn't catch it. This aroused her competitive nature, and she followed the butterfly all the way to the outskirts of a small courtyard. With a beautiful grab, she finally caught the butterfly. Just as he was about to walk back in triumphantly, he heard a conversation coming from Xiao Xie's closed window. Do you think the third princess is pretending to be sick? It should be. She must be pretending to be sick to gain the sympathy of the eighth prince. This woman is very scheming. I thought so too. I heard that His Highness the eighth prince originally came to break off the engagement, but in the end, this woman deliberately fainted in front of him. His Highness the eighth prince is incomparably benevolent and righteous. He couldn't bear to see a girl fainting in front of so many people, so he brought her back. I don't know what this woman did, but she actually made His Highness the eighth prince stand up for her. She made His Majesty build the best palace for her overnight. I heard that the things inside are the best and the most expensive. Any random chair is worth a lot of money. Do you guys think that His Highness the eighth prince was charmed by her seductive methods? These days, he spent most of his time in her courtyard. Someone sneered. What nonsense are you guessing? What kind of person is the eighth prince? How could he be charmed by her? I heard that before he left, countless women were infatuated with him. Some of the bolder ones even went to him to recommend themselves as his pillow, but he casually threw them out. How could such a person be charmed by the third princess? If he was really infatuated with her, he wouldn't have come to cancel the engagement. But some people say that the eighth prince doesn't mention canceling the engagement anymore, as if he regretted it. He often goes in and out with the third princess. They won't really become a couple again, right? Absolutely not. The eighth prince is just purely treating her illness. The only reason I'm being nice to her now is because I feel guilty. When Ji Xinyue heard this, she deeply agreed. She felt that the little palace maid who spoke at the end was rather wise and farsighted, revealing the true meaning behind His Highness the eighth prince's rescue. Although the contents of these conversations were quite insulting to Ji Xinyue, it was a good thing that Ji Xinyue was already used to hearing these kinds of insults. She didn't take it to heart at all, automatically filtering it out. Just as she was about to leave with the butterfly's wings in her hand, the words that followed caused her to stop in her tracks. You've all guessed wrong. In fact, His Highness the eighth prince has been staying in the palace not for the third princess. The third princess is just an excuse for him to stay. He's actually staying for another person. Who? Who is the eighth prince doing this for? Hurry up and tell me, don't keep me in suspense. He did it for the second princess. Ji Xinyue's fingers tightened, and one of the butterfly's wings was pulled off by her. Second princess? How could this be? The second princess is already married. Someone questioned in surprise. Chapter 2682. So what if she's married? They can't stop each other from loving each other. The voice of the little maid who threw down this gossip was full of vicissitudes. You probably don't know, but 3,000 years ago, His Highness the eighth prince and the second princess were childhood sweethearts, a true pair. Unfortunately, the heavens played tricks on people, and the third princess was born. Not only was she born, but there were also a few phoenixes flying around. So everyone thought that the third princess must be extraordinary. Only then did the East Sky Emperor send someone to propose marriage to the third princess, allowing her to pick up a loophole. His Highness the eighth prince and the second princess were childhood sweethearts? This is the first time I've heard of this. Tell us in detail. The other maids in Xiao Xia's group all became gossipy. Ji Shenyu also had a rare curiosity, so she also calmed down and listened. The little maid who spread the gossip did not disappoint, and vividly described. 3,000 years ago, our second princess was still a young maiden. She went out to participate in a garden party, and accidentally fell into a lake. At that time, His Highness the Eighth Prince spared no effort to save her. Our princess was very beautiful, and His Highness the Eighth Prince fell in love with her at first sight. He went out to swim with her, and when they parted, he told our second princess that he would send someone to propose marriage to her in the future. Our second princess also fell in love with him at first sight, and had been waiting for his people to come. Who would have thought that when the Eastern Sky Clan finally sent someone to propose marriage, the one he was asking for was the third princess? Our second princess was heartbroken, and hated him for being heartless, so in a fit of anger, she married the Northern Sky Clan, and became a princess. There was actually such a story. Ji Shenyu felt that it was a bit hard to believe, because the content was too similar to those melodramatic stories. She had read a lot of stories these years, and among them, there were quite a few that were similar to this. Ji Shenyu had already heard that the little maid who spread the gossip was the second princess, Ji Shenmeng's, and was quite loyal to the second princess. She had followed the second princess since she was young, so she did know some things about the second princess. Could it be that what she said was true? Not only did this marriage make her, Ji Shenyu, miserable, but it also unintentionally made her a big stick to break up a pair of mandarin ducks? The maid continued. Later on, His Highness the Eighth Prince made a special trip to the Eastern Sky Clan to look for the second princess. He told her that he didn't expect things to turn out like this, and that the person proposing marriage must have made a mistake. He told the second princess to wait for him, and that he would give the second princess an explanation. However, at that time, the second princess had already married our second prince consort. What was done could not be undone, and the second princess had no other choice. His Highness the Eighth Prince left. I heard that he drank all night and cried all night. The next day he left for another place and never came back. This little maid spoke so vividly that Ji Shenyu felt goosebumps all over her body when she heard it. She could barely imagine Rongyu Tianlan drinking alone, but crying for an entire night. The image of Rongyu Tianlan hugging a wine gourd and crying her eyes out seemed to flash before Ji Shenyu's eyes. That scene was so beautiful that she couldn't even imagine it. That guy looks so happy every day. Does he even have tear ducts? She began to deeply doubt the veracity of the little handmaiden's words, and how much of a discount she needed. Naturally, there were also people who questioned. That can't be right. I heard that His Highness the Eighth Prince left the Fanning continent before he was engaged to the third princess. Why would he look for the second princess after the engagement? I heard that the second princess got married 2 years after the third princess, and His Highness the Eighth Prince were engaged. The timing obviously didn't match. Chapter 2683. The little maid who was spreading the gossip said disdainfully, "What you heard is only the official story. Actually, what I said is the truth. To tell you the truth, this time His Highness the Eighth Prince stayed in the palace and met the second princess several times." She then lowered her voice. "Actually, His Highness the Eighth Prince secretly visited our second princess several times. He stayed in the palace completely for our second princess, but he couldn't say it out loud. Sigh, 2 pitiful lovers, torn apart just like that." The little maid's long sigh was filled with emotions about the tragedy of love. Ji Shenyu shuddered. She realized that her imagination was not bad. In her mind, she actually imagined the sad scene of the second princess and Rongyu Tianlan meeting in secret. Thus she shuddered again. Somehow, she felt that the scene was not quite right. This time, the second princess stayed in her mother's house for a long time and did not leave. However, she heard from the empress that the second princess had already bid farewell to her. But after hearing that Rongyu Tianlan had arrived, she did not leave. These few days, the second princess had indeed been wandering around the palace. She even passed by Rongyu Tianlan's courtyard 2 or 3 times. Once, She even fell into Ji Xinyue's eyes. But Ji Xinyue did not see any sparks between them. Could it be that they had already collided? But both of them were good at acting to cover it up? Ji Xinyue was thinking while pinching the butterfly's wings, when she was awakened by a cheerful call. Third sister. The voice was crisp like a tender cucumber with flowers and leaves. Ji Xinyue looked up and saw Ji Tianyue falling from the sky like a pink butterfly. The noise was not small, and it also startled a few little maids who were gossiping in the small pavilion. The window opened, and a few pale little faces peeked out. When they saw Ji Xinyue, their little faces became even paler. Sister, what are you doing here? Have your injuries healed? Ji Tianyue's big watery eyes were full of concern. I saw a butterfly, so I chased it here and caught it. Tianyue, do you think this butterfly is pretty? Ji Xinyue picked up the butterfly and showed it to Ji Tianyue. Seeing the butterfly, Ji Tianyue cried, Sister, why is it missing one of its wings? Ji Xinyue blushed with shame. I accidentally caught it just now. Does that mean it won't survive? Ji Tianyue held the butterfly in her hands. The butterfly was fluttering in her palms. Without a wing, it could no longer fly. What awaited it was indeed death. Ji Tianyue was a little girl who would shed tears at the sight of a withered flower. Seeing butterfly in such a state, her tears flowed down like raindrops from a pear blossom. Ji Xinyue originally did not take this butterfly to heart. But now that she saw her sister crying like this, she suddenly felt that she had committed a grave sin. She coughed and said, It's fine. I'll help it grow its wings back. She scanned her surroundings and finally found the wing that had fallen off. She then used a small spell technique, and sure enough, the wing grew back on the butterfly's body. Ji Tianyue was immediately overjoyed. Her eyes curved in joy as she hugged Ji Xinyue's arm. Big sister, you're the best. Ji Xinyue's pretty face was slightly pale, and she felt a turbid qi floating in her body. It seemed like Rong Yuetian was right. She couldn't use any spells now. She only used such a small spell, and her body started to feel strange again. Chapter 2684. She patted Ji Tianyue's shoulder. Alright, its wings have just grown back, it's still a bit injured. I'll bring it back to rest for a while and feed it some spirit water, it should be fine. Ji Tianyue happily ran off with the butterfly in her hands. At this moment, the few gossipy maids also came out of the small pavilion and greeted Ji Xinyue. Ji Xinyue glanced at them and smiled. So it was you guys talking here. The maids didn't know how much she had heard and were nervous, only replying vaguely. We were just gossiping, we made a fool of ourselves, Ji Xinyue leisurely said. There's nothing to laugh at. I vaguely heard you guys say that my second sister is cheating on me. The maidservants' faces turned pale. Especially the second princess maid, her face was even paler. No, the princess must have heard wrongly. Ji Xinyue took out a talisman from her sleeve and said lightly. This princess heard wrongly? Then this princess talisman shouldn't have recorded wrongly, right? You probably don't know this, but this is a recording talisman. It has already recorded every word you said. Since you think this princess heard wrongly, then this princess will let His Majesty hear it. It's better to let His Majesty verify it with you. All the maids kneeled on the ground, trembling like quails in the wind and rain, desperately kowtowing, begging Ji Xinyue to be merciful. Seeing her indifference, the maids who were talking excitedly just now began to slap themselves in the face to beg for forgiveness. Ji Xinyue stood there with her arms crossed, watching them slap their faces until they looked like purple eggplants. Only then did she slowly open her mouth. I'll let you guys off this time. The next time this princess hears any rumors in the palace, this princess will put all the credit on your heads. I'll definitely report it to father, and let him deal with it. The maids nodded like they were pounding garlic, repeatedly agreeing, gossiping about the princesses, regardless of whether it was true or false. Once the evidence was conclusive, all of them would be sentenced to death. That's why they were so scared. Seeing that Ji Xinyue's tone was softening, they naturally accepted the order and thanked her. However, there was someone who was a little slow to react and couldn't help but say, Third princess, we naturally won't discuss this anymore. But if other people in the palace talk about it and spread it, Ji Xinyu gave her a rather benevolent smile. That's your problem. If this princess hears any more gossip, this princess will make an example out of you. After saying this, she turned around and left. She believed that in the next few days, her ears would be much quieter. Gossips like to gather together. These maids should be the most outstanding ones among these gossips. As long as they were restrained, for the sake of their own lives, they would try their best to prevent others from spreading the rumors. Ji Xinyu wasn't someone who was afraid of gossip. As someone who had been in the center of gossip and entertainment, she was already immune to such rumors. She was just a little curious. As the saying goes, there is no smoke without fire. Could it be that her second sister and Rongyue Tianlan did have a little relationship back then? Also, saying that she pretended to be sick to gain Rongyue Tianlan's sympathy, to achieve the goal of not breaking off the engagement was too infuriating. God knows how much she wanted to break off this unlucky engagement that had pushed her into a whirlpool. She was now able to move normally. Perhaps she wouldn't need to wait 18 days for her injuries to completely heal. Chapter 2685. This Eighth Highness should also want to break off the engagement, otherwise, he wouldn't be treating her so wholeheartedly and giving her so many spirit herbs to eat every day. Ji Xinyu recognized many of the spirit herbs. They were all extremely rare in this continent. Some of them were even things that could only be found by chance. But now she was eating so many of them like they were beans. Ji Xinyu's heart ached for these spirit herbs for Rongyue Tianlan. At the same time she admired him. In order to break off this engagement, he really put in a lot of effort. Coming out of the back garden, Ji Xinyu walked around the Empress Palace, wanting to pay her respects and go back after saying a few words. She happened to meet the South Sky Emperor there. These days, the South Sky Emperor came to the Empress Palace very frequently. Originally, he didn't visit for a few months, but these days, he came to the Empress Palace almost every day to report. He started to dote on his wife again. The estrangement of thousands of years couldn't be eliminated in a few days. Every time Ji Xinyu saw her father, she felt speechless, and often there was an awkward silence. This time was the same. After saying a few words, she got up and left. But this time, the South Sky Emperor seemed to have taken the wrong medicine. He directly held her hand and said that he wanted to have a good chat with her. His face was full of love, and his words were gentle, like a loving father. But Ji Xinyu was used to being cold to him. Now that he suddenly acted like this, she was not used to it. The South Sky Emperor's palm was well maintained. There was not a single callus on his palm. It was warm and soft. When Ji Xinyu was young, she was often held by this hand. But she didn't know when. But this hand never came close to her. At that time, she was also not used to it. When she was young, she would always try to throw herself into his arms and let him hold her. However, he would always glare at her with disgust and freeze her in place, not daring to move forward. When she was young, she always thought that she wasn't outstanding enough. She always thought that she wasn't good enough, so she tried her best to please him. When he asked her to enter the Purple Cloud sect, she entered the Purple Cloud sect. She studied and cultivated with all her might just to show her father that she was actually quite outstanding. She wouldn't embarrass him. But later on, she realized that it wasn't that she wasn't good enough, but that the person who doted on her didn't like her anymore. So no matter what she did, she would always be wrong and be reprimanded by him. After being disappointed for too long, she no longer cared about what she had always wanted. But occasionally, when she saw her father dote on her little sister, she would think of those memories that she had almost forgotten. Now that her father held her hand, she had almost forgotten the temperature of her father's palm. Although her father's, she still knew it. The South Heaven Emperor kindly asked her a lot of questions, such as her injuries, and whether she had enough maids by her side. In the end, he talked about the difficulties of governing the Nantiang clan. Among the 4 heavenly clans, the Nantiang clan was relatively weaker. They could only stand on equal footing with the other heavenly clans through marriage. For example, when Ji Xinmeng was married to the Baitian clan, although she was married to a prince who was not very favored, She was still considered in-laws with the Baitian clan. That was why the Baitian clan gave the Nantian clan some convenience in dealing with the surrounding affairs. Ru tian tian ru ru ru. To ru to the ru 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 ru. He are you roam roam ru ru rus. Chapter 2686. He also praised Rong Yu Tianlan's character and appearance, saying that this son-in-law was a good husband that couldn't be found even with a lantern. Then, he asked about her and Rong Yu Tianlan's interactions over the past few days. He asked her hopefully, "Father, he seems to be treating you well, so he probably doesn't want to break off the engagement. You have to seize this opportunity." Ji Xinyu's heart suddenly felt cold. So her father was suddenly so good to her because of Rong Yu Tianlan. He still had great hope for this marriage. She slowly pulled her hand out, looked at her father, and said seriously, "Father, he is only good to me because he feels guilty. There is no other reason. I have already agreed with him that when my injuries are completely healed, I will go to the marriage pillar to break off the engagement." Looking at the South Heaven Emperor's pale face, she bitterly smiled and asked, "Father, if this marriage didn't happen, you wouldn't recognize me as your daughter, right? Is it because of him that you care about me?" The South Sky Emperor was stunned. He looked at his daughter and subconsciously retorted, "No, Xinyu, don't misunderstand. In my heart, you are always my good daughter. But this marriage, Imperial Father, this marriage is impossible. You don't have to have any more hope. If Royal Father treats Xinyu well because of this, then Royal Father can continue to treat Xinyu coldly, since Xinyu is already used to it. If Royal Father doesn't like Xinyu because of this, then Xinyu will naturally leave, so that Royal Father won't have to worry about Xinyu." Ji Xinyu turned and left. The South Sky Emperor's face changed and he grabbed her. "Xinyu, is this how you see your father?" Ji Xinyu broke free from his hand and forced a smile. "Father, I am a little tired. I will take my leave first." She bowed to the South Sky Emperor and turned to leave. The South Sky Emperor was stunned. He never thought that his daughter would look at him like this. It turned out that he had always given his daughter this feeling. When Ji Xinyu returned to her courtyard, it was already sunset. The afterglow of the setting sun gilded everything in the courtyard. Strange flowers and plants, fake mountains and paintings, they were all bathed in the afterglow of the setting sun. Ji Xinyu looked at the scenery in the courtyard in a daze. Rongyue Tianlan brought out a table from nowhere. On the table was the 4 treasures of the study. On the table was a large piece of rice paper. He stood in front of the table and was drawing. Beside him stood a little girl. Her pink dress was as tender as a spring flower under the setting sun. Her little face was also as tender as a spring flower. She was focused on Rongyu Tianlan painting. The little girl was none other than Ji Xinyu, her little sister. The afterglow of the setting sun outlined their faint silhouettes, which looked very harmonious. Seeming to have heard the commotion, Ji Tianyue raised her head and saw Ji Xinyu standing at the door. Her eyes lit up and she ran over. "Third sister." The little girl was unusually enthusiastic and directly threw herself into her arms. Ji Xinyu helped her up and rubbed her head. "Tianyu, why are you here?" Ji Tianyu's big eyes curved into crescent moons. "Third sister, after I brought the butterfly back, it has been listless. I fed it spirit water, but it didn't work. I was afraid that it would die, so I brought it to find you. I found that you weren't here, but Brother Rongyu was here. Brother Rongyu is very capable. He only blew a breath of air, and the butterfly was alive and kicking again. He really is capable, right?" Chapter 2687. She looked at Rongyue Tianlan with eyes full of admiration. Ji Xinyu looked at her, then looked at Rongyue Tianlan, and finally understood what was going on. However, she was still a little puzzled, so she asked, "That brother, why are you in my courtyard at this time?" Although Rongyue Tianlan could usually stay in her courtyard for half a day, it was only to treat her injuries. Once the treatment was done, he would leave immediately and return to his own courtyard. The treatment would usually be done in the morning. According to Rongyue Tianlan, the morning was the best time for all things to grow, and healing in the morning was the fastest. In the afternoon, they would do their own things, and no one would interfere with each other. Therefore, Ji Xinyue was a little surprised to see him in her courtyard at this time, especially when she saw him take out her desk and use her 4 treasures of the study. Rongyue Tianlan finished the last stroke, but he did not answer Ji Xinyue's question. Instead, he beckoned to Ji Tianyue. "Come here, take a look at the painting." Ji Tianyue ran over, and after looking around for a while she exclaimed, "Brother Rongyue, your painting is so beautiful. It's even better than father's personal painter." She carefully picked up the painting and showed it to Ji Xinyue, as if she was presenting a treasure. "Third sister, look, isn't the painting good? Look at the sunset, the clouds, the continuous palace. The density is appropriate, the distance is good." A bunch of professional comments came out of her little mouth, which made Ji Xinyue look at her in a new light. She had long heard that her younger sister was good at music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, but she did not know much about it. Now it seemed that the rumors were true. At least she was good at judging paintings. Ji Xinyue also looked at the painting. Although she had never learned how to paint, she had wandered around the Jianghu for so many years, so she was still very knowledgeable and knew a little about painting. However, it was just a superficial knowledge. Rongyue Tianlan's painting looked majestic, and it was indeed a good painting, especially the line of words on the painting, which was written in a flamboyant and elegant style, which matched his temperament very well. "Third sister, Brother Rongyu said he would give this painting to me." Ji Tianyue's big eyes sparkled as she held the painting like it was a treasure. She was short, so when she grabbed the top of the painting with both hands, the bottom almost dragged on the ground. She had to tiptoe to do so. Ji Xinyue glanced at Rongyue Tianlan again. He was standing there with his arms crossed, looking at her and her sister with a smile. To be more precise, he was looking at Ji Tianyue with a gentle gaze. It seemed like he got along well with little Tianyu, so he liked children. Ji Tianyue stuffed the painting into Ji Xinyue's hands. "Big sister, hold it for me first. I want to dance for big brother Rongyu," I promised him. Ji Xinyue. Ji Tianyue was very talented in dancing. Her pink dress fluttered in the wind, and every move she made was filled with spiritual energy. There was a rumor in the Fanning continent that Princess Ji Tianyue's dance was the dance of a celestial being. This was also the main reason why the South Heaven Emperor doted on her. When the South Heaven clan had distinguished guests, they would usually let Ji Tianyue perform a solo dance to win the guests' praise. She had not yet reached marriageable age, but there were already many young masters and princes who came to ask for her hand in marriage. The South Heaven Emperor wanted to choose the best for his younger daughter. In addition, his daughter was still young, so he had not found a suitable one after picking from those who came to ask for her hand in marriage. Chapter 2688. Although Ji Xinyue did not have many opportunities to return to the palace, she was lucky enough to see her once 100 years ago. She was already dancing very well then, and now she was even better looking at her. Rongyue Tianlan casually took out a flute and played it for her. The flute's sound was beautiful and ethereal. Her dance was light and graceful like a fairy. Ji Xinyue looked at this, and then looked at that, and suddenly felt that she was a little redundant. She casually placed the painting on the table, then turned and walked out. Ji Tianyue was very focused on dancing, and Rongyue Tianlan was also very focused, so no one noticed that Ji Xinyue had left. The setting sun had completely rolled down the mountain, and dusk gradually rose, slowly enveloping the entire world. The lamps in front of the shops on the street lit up one after another, so the street did not seem dark. The people of Fire Phoenix City lived and worked in peace, and the night market was also very lively. Ji Xinyue mixed in with the crowd, strolled around the shops, looked at the colored lanterns and guessed the riddles. She was quite happy with herself, and the irritation in her heart lessened a lot. Perhaps it was because of the gossip she had heard today, or perhaps it was because of the conversation she had with her imperial father, or perhaps it was because Rongyu Tianlan had occupied her courtyard without informing her first. Her nerves had been trained over the years, and if it was just one of these things, she would not take it to heart. However, all of these things happened at the same time, which made her want to take a stroll to relieve her boredom. She was a little annoyed dealing with the people and things in the palace, so she naturally did not want to walk around the palace and annoy herself even more, so she walked out. Of course, for convenience, she changed into a man's body. According to Rongyue Tianlan, she could not use spells these few days, but she had already used it once in the afternoon, when she was restoring the butterfly wings for her sister. At that time, she felt a little uncomfortable, but not long after, she returned to normal. Since it was not a big deal after using it once, it should not be a big deal if she used it a second time, right? Anyway, this transformation technique did not consume much spiritual power, and was even easier than restoring the butterfly wings. Therefore, after she left the palace, she changed her appearance and became an elegant young master. Today was the full moon festival, and there were many people on the streets. Families with children came out to stroll around the streets. Perhaps it was because the moonlight was too beautiful that Ji Xinyu, who had always prided herself on being simple-minded, was a little sentimental tonight. Especially when she saw her family traveling together, she felt even more upset. This was originally a very ordinary happiness, but Ji Xinyu had never tasted this kind of happiness before. Perhaps she had tasted it when she was young, but it had been so long ago that she had almost forgotten what it was like to travel with her parents. She wandered the streets until the sky turned dark and her stomach growled. Only then did she remember that she hadn't eaten anything. She casually walked into a restaurant on the side of the road. There were many people in the restaurant. She searched for a long time before she found a table in a secluded corner. She ordered a few dishes and a pot of wine and slowly ate. Restaurants had always been places where gossip spread. Now that Ji Xinyu had heard some gossip, she realized that she had once again become the main character of the gossip. However, the gossip about her this time was good. Most of it was praising her. The third princess was really as beautiful as a flower. The third princess's divine skills were unparalleled. The third princess's filial piety was bursting. His Highness Rongyu the eighth prince regretted breaking off this engagement, and was now living in the palace, trying his best to win her back. Chapter 2689. Especially the story of the third princess teaching Changbu by a lesson at the banquet. Some people seemed to have seen it with their own eyes as they talked about it like a storyteller, their saliva flying everywhere, as they gestured with their chopsticks from time to time. Ji Xinyu's ears were filled with this gossip. After being scolded for nearly 3,000 years, she had long gotten used to it. Now that she suddenly heard these praises, she actually felt a little happy. If she had known earlier, perhaps she would have exposed her martial arts and appearance earlier. But if she had been exposed early on, her father would have imprisoned her in the palace, and then brought her to attend all kinds of events. He would have thought of ways to let her get to know more nobles, so that he could find a few potential husbands for her. How could she have been free for more than 2,000 years? In fact, her bad reputation over the years was not necessarily a bad thing for her. At least she did not have to go back to the palace to see her father's cold face. A little girl at the next table suddenly cried. Ji Xinyu turned her head, and saw a family of 4 sitting at the next table. The couple and their 2 daughters. This family was probably not rich, so they only ordered 2 or 3 dishes, all of which were children's favorites. The younger one was more domineering. She pulled all the dishes in front of her and blocked them with one arm, not letting the older child eat. The older sister was also a child, so she naturally did not want to. While the younger sister was not paying attention, she quickly pulled a plate and put it in front of her. Before she could even move her chopsticks, the younger sister cried out. Her crying face was like a pear blossom in the rain, feeling extremely wronged. The parents felt sorry for the younger daughter, and without any explanation, they let the older daughter give the dishes to the younger sister. The older daughter also felt wronged. She held the plate in her small hands, and did not want to return it. Father, mother, sister already has 2 plates. I only have 1, I'm hungry. The mother persuaded. Don't make your sister cry. She can't finish 3 plates. You can eat when she has leftovers. Quickly give it to sister. The older daughter's eyes reddened. Why should I always have leftovers? It's like this at home. It's like this outside. She simply wrapped her arms around the plate and refused to return it. The father was impatient. Why are you so immature? He took a pair of chopsticks and hit his daughter's arm hard twice. The child's arm was very tender, so it immediately swelled up. The older daughter also cried, "You're biased. Too biased. Why do you give everything to sister? I am also your daughter." The mother frowned. "Jing, or are you jealous of your sister? Aren't you being too insensible?" "Yes, I'm jealous of her. You give her everything." "You're not giving me anything." "Wah." The little girl finally exploded and ran out crying. The couple looked at each other. The mother wanted to chase after her, but the father was still angry. The older she gets, the more immature she becomes. Let her go, don't bother with her. The younger daughter also pulled her mother's sleeve and said, "Mother, peel prawns for Meng Meng. Meng Meng wants to eat big prawns." The mother had no choice but to sit down again, and the family of 4 became 3, and started eating again. The eldest daughter was actually only 100 years old, which was equivalent to a 6 or 7-year-old child in the human world. With such a child running out on her own, the parents were not worried at all. Ji Shenyu inadvertently saw this scene and felt a little suffocated in her heart. She rubbed her eyebrows and suddenly lost her appetite as she looked at the table full of dishes. Back then, she had actually been secretly jealous of her younger sister. She was jealous that she could easily gain the love of her parents. She was jealous that she could live a carefree life. She was jealous that she didn't have to bear so many curses. Chapter 2690. Rather than saying that she was jealous, it was more like she was envious. She wished that she could be like her, and even fantasized that she could be as innocent as her, be loved by her parents like her, and be able to sing and dance like her. This desire became her inner demon, and because of it, she went mad once and was in a coma for many years, almost losing her life. Of course, after waking up, she thought it through. She was her, not anyone else, and she didn't need to be anyone else. She thought that she was no longer envious of her sister, but after seeing how Rongyue Tianlan and her sister got along, she felt a little envious. She envied her sister for being able to easily get the care and love of others. Her parents were like that, and even her fiancé was like that. Naive and innocent children could always arouse people's pity and love, right? Unfortunately, she couldn't be innocent anymore, nor could she be innocent. Although she looked like a young woman, her heart was full of vicissitudes. She rubbed her eyebrows, feeling that her heart was a little hot tonight, and unknowingly, she drank a few more glasses of wine. The weather was cold, and not many people would sit by the window, so even if Ji Shenyu came late, she could still sit by the window, drinking while casually admiring the scenery outside. Suddenly, her eyes focused and fell on 2 people in the crowd, an adult and a child, a man and a woman. The man was handsome, and the girl was innocent with a hint of childishness. It was Rongyue Tianlan and Ji Tianyue. Although the 2 of them had changed into casual clothes, their appearances were outstanding and attracted the attention of countless people walking on the street. Rongyue Tianlan had long been used to such gazes and walked as if nothing happened. After all, Ji Tianyue didn't come out often and suddenly became the focus of everyone. She was still a little nervous. She couldn't help but hide behind Rongyue Tianlan, sticking close to him. She held an exquisite sugar figurine in one hand, and the other hand held onto Rongyue Tianlan's sleeve, like a little bird, afraid that he would throw her on the street. "Brother Rongyue, why are they looking at us?" Ji Tianyue asked softly. "That's because they see that Tianyue is beautiful. Don't worry. They don't have any bad intentions. You don't have to be so nervous." Rongyue Tianlan comforted her gently. Ji Tianyue was still a little nervous. "Brother Rongyue, you won't throw me on the street, right?" I'm scared." "No, I won't leave you behind." Rongyue Ishinlin raised her hand and rubbed her hair. Ji Tianyue was finally relieved. She was still a child after all, and she had someone she trusted by her side. She quickly forgot her nervousness and jumped around Rongyue Tianlan. Because of the South Heaven Emperor's strict control, she rarely came out. Everything she saw was new. She pulled Rongyue Ishinlin to look at this and that. Occasionally, when she saw something new, she would stop and buy a few. Rong Yue Tianlan stayed by her side. He was such a person, yet he didn't find it annoying to stay by such a girl's side. It was as if he would grant Ji Tianyue's every request. Not only did he buy a lot of things for her, he even helped her carry them. Of course, he didn't carry it with his hand. Instead, he put it into his storage pouch. Ji Xinyu watched from above and saw him put a bag of fried beans, a few boxes of rouge powder, a few small hairpins, bracelets. They were all bought by Ji Tianyue. The little girl was overjoyed. Someone was willing to pay for her and even carry her bags for her. Naturally, she bought a lot of things useful and useless. She collected a lot of things. Chapter 2691. Rong Yu Tianlan followed beside her with a smile on his face and a doting expression on his face. Occasionally, his gaze would wander around the street, as if he was looking for something. Ji Xinyue guessed that he was probably looking for something suitable for Ji Tianyue to buy to make the little girl happier. Originally, Ji Xinyue wanted to bring her sister out to play, but every time she went back, the South Heaven Emperor would guard against her, as if she was a thief. He was afraid that she would lead a good sister astray, so he didn't let her have much contact with her sister, let alone bring her out. This Rong Yu Tianlan was quite capable. After staying in the palace for a few days, he had gained her father's trust and was willing to let him bring his precious daughter out. The two of them quickly merged into the crowd, and their figures gradually disappeared. Ji Xinyue retracted her gaze and lowered her head to drink a few more cups of wine. Perhaps it was because of her injury, her alcohol tolerance was a little low. After just one pot of wine, she felt a little dizzy. Looking out of the window, the moon was already high in the sky, silver light everywhere. A few strands of white clouds like fine sand twined around the moon, giving it a different kind of charm. Such a beautiful scene. Yet she was actually in a restaurant feeling sad about spring and autumn. It was too boring. This full moon festival was a festival for the commoners. The palace didn't care about it. In the past, Ji Xinyue would often call her friends and find a place to admire the moon. Everyone would sit and talk, or they would hunt some monsters that only appeared on the night of the full moon. This year, she was injured, so it was impossible to hunt monsters, but finding a quiet place to admire the moon was a good idea. She poured another gourd of wine and left the restaurant, heading towards the west of the city. There was a Dufeng mountain in the west of the city, and there was a moon-admiring peak in the mountain, which was taller than the surrounding mountains. Because the peak was extremely tall and straight, and there was a barrier on the peak, ordinary people couldn't go up at all. So that place became a place for experts to admire the moon. The full moon festival was just an unknown festival. On this day, ordinary people wandered around the city, admiring the lanterns, eating and drinking. And other immortal experts wouldn't specially come here to admire the moon. So there shouldn't be many people on moon-admiring peak today. Ji Xinyu only wanted to find a quiet place to drink a little wine, which was why she came here. She didn't expect to meet an acquaintance at the foot of the mountain. Rong Yue Tianheng. Rong Yue Tianheng's dressing tonight was a bit flashy. He wore a snow-white brocade robe and a black jade belt on his waist that sparkled under the moonlight. He wasn't alone. In his arms, there was a young girl in light green clothes. When Ji Xinyu saw them, Rong Yu Tianheng was coaxing the young girl to climb up the mountain. The young girl was probably afraid of heights. Her legs and stomach kept trembling. "Hero, I'm afraid of heights. This place looks dangerous. Let's not go up? Let's climb that mountain." She pointed at a small hill not far away. The hill was like a grave. It was not high and the slope was gentle. That mountain peak is also not bad. There are flowers on it. The moon is so high up, isn't it beautiful? Don't you think so? Hero Rong Yue Tianheng was obviously not happy. Xiaonan, only by climbing to the highest peak and admiring the moon can you appreciate the beauty of looking down at the mountains. Don't worry, I'll protect you from the side. I won't let you fall. But I'm still afraid. Don't be afraid. With this young master here, I will definitely not leave out a single strand of your hair. Rong Yue Tianheng coaxed her and pulled her up the mountain. Chapter 2692. Ji Xinyu watched from below and couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that Rongyue Tianheng had found a confidant. But this confidant was a bit timid. But this would make him look more manly, right? She didn't want to disturb them, so she simply crossed her arms and watched. After climbing 3 to 4 feet, the woman's legs were already shaking like a pipa. She hugged Rongyue Tianheng's arm tightly. Hero, let's not climb. Let's not climb, I'm scared. She was shaking so hard that her hand unknowingly went into Rongyue Tianheng's armpit. Rongyue Tianheng's itchy flesh was especially developed. Hey, don't hug me here. Ha ha ha, no, don't hug me here. He was laughing so hard that there was nothing under his feet, and the two of them fell directly from above. Ah! The woman's scream could tear apart the floating clouds in the sky. Fortunately, Rongyue Tianheng was very manly. Seeing that the situation was not good, he turned his body and turned to the bottom. When he landed, he became the woman's cushion. The woman almost fainted from fright. She was lying on Rongyue Tianheng's body in a daze, unable to regain her senses. Rongyue Tianheng was a thick-skinned person. After being hit by the woman, he only groaned. He panted on the ground and said, "You're so heavy. Get up, get up." The woman finally scrambled to get up. But the woman was so scared that her legs went soft. Just as she stood up, her body swayed, and she screamed and fell towards Rongyue Tianheng again. Thus, Rongyue Tianheng, who had just sat up, was smashed back down again. Damn it. Rongyue Tianheng's face was full of black lines. He cursed and sat up with the woman in his arms. Aren't you always brave? So you were lying to me. I didn't scare you. I'm usually brave enough to catch snakes and mice with my bare hands, but that doesn't include climbing such a steep mountain. The woman's voice was full of grievance. I used to climb the small mountain over there to admire the moon. We can go there. Forget it, I'm not going anywhere. My interest in admiring the moon has been ruined by you. You women are so troublesome. Rongyue Tianheng had a headache. He raised his head and suddenly saw Ji Xinyu standing in the shadows not far away, as if she was admiring the scenery. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he jumped up from the ground and flew towards her. Brother Shen. Ji Xinyu didn't think that he would be able to see her in the corner when he was coaxing the beauty. It seemed like he wasn't someone who would lose his humanity when he saw the opposite sex. However, wasn't this kid a little too enthusiastic? Judging from her posture, she wanted to give her a big hug. Ji Xinyu's heel spun slightly, and the grass stick in her hand tapped his shoulder, stopping his passionate lunge. Young Marquis Tianheng, calm down, calm down. Although she couldn't use her spiritual power now, her internal power was still very good. Especially her acupoint recognition was amazingly accurate. This little bit made half of Rongyue Tianheng's body numb, and he couldn't help but stop in his tracks. Only now did he remember that this younger brother Shen, you didn't like to have physical contact with others. He scratched his head embarrassedly and laughed. Brother, I'm so happy to meet you. He sized up Ji Xinyu again, the happiness on his face not diminishing. Brother Shen is also here to admire the moon? That's great. Let's go together. I was just worried that I wouldn't be able to find a partner. As he spoke, he grabbed Ji Xinyu's hand again. Chapter 2693. Ji Xinyu felt that this brat seemed to have taken the wrong medicine today. He liked to touch her frequently. Although it was nice to meet an old friend, wasn't his happiness a bit too much? She took a step forward, and Rongyue Tianheng grabbed empty air again. Ji Xinyu looked at the girl who was staring blankly at them. That girl was very beautiful, and had a slim figure. If she wasn't so scared and her face was pale, she would be even more beautiful. Young Marquis, it's better to admire the moon with your close female friends. Don't drag me in. She looked at the girl again. That girl was looking at her eagerly. Her beautiful eyes sparkled under the moonlight, but her body was still trembling. Ji Xin, you couldn't help but feel injustice for the girl. I'm quite curious. Why didn't you ride a cloud and carry her up? Why did she have to climb up herself? Girls are usually a bit timid. You'll scare her like this. The girl looked at Ji Xinyu with even more watery eyes and nodded repeatedly. Rongyue Tianheng couldn't help but sigh. I suffered a small injury a few days ago. I can't use my spiritual power for the time being. So they were both in the same boat. Ji Shenyu said sympathetically, I see. How did you get injured? To be injured to the point where you can't use your spiritual power for the time being. Under the moonlight, Rong Juishenheng's handsome face was suspiciously red. This, Ji Shenyu said considerately. It's fine if it's not convenient to say. Rong Yue Tianheng hardened his heart. He felt that brothers should treat each other with sincerity, so there was nothing to hide. Speaking of which, I am ashamed. That night, when we met, I was so happy that I drank a few more cups. I drank until I was dizzy, and didn't know why I ran to the burial mound, and slept for half the night. You also know that I am afraid of skeletons, but when I woke up I saw a few skeletons. In a moment of shock, I accidentally rolled down the slope. It was also my bad luck that my Qihai acupoint hit a few vertical ribs, so I let Brother Shen see a joke. Ji Shenyu. She coughed guiltily. That day, she had only taught Rong Juishenheng a small lesson. She had taught him a lesson for saying that she was a piece of trash. She didn't expect that it would cause such an effect. She felt a bit guilty, so she asked with concern, Your Qihai point wasn't pierced, right? How many did you pierce in? How deep was it? Are they all grown up now? He then took out 2 packets of top-notch golden sore ointment from his sleeves and eagerly said, Here, this is for you. This golden sore ointment is specially made to treat all kinds of injuries. She then looked at his slightly pale handsome face. You didn't hurt anything important, did you? Rong Yu Tianheng was overwhelmed by the favor. He had been together with Ji Shenyu for so long, and she had always been cold to him. He never thought that she would care about him so much this time. He originally wanted to express that he was fine in a dignified manner, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was rare for Shenyu to be so gentle towards him. Therefore, his body swayed slightly. My Qihai acupoint was pierced quite badly. Originally, it was already showing signs of recovery. However, after being hit by Xiaonan just now, I feel a lot of pain now. He swayed again, and took the opportunity to place an arm on her shoulder. Brother Shen, let me lean on you. Ji Shenyu felt guilty in her heart. She couldn't bear to push him away when he leaned over, so she could only help him sit on a large rock. Why are you so weak? Chapter 2694. It was Rong Yishenheng's first time being so close to her. He felt that although she was a man, her body was as soft as a woman's. There was also a faint fragrance on her body, which was extremely pleasant. He wanted to smell her again, but he couldn't help but lean on her shoulder. My body hurts a lot, and my head is a little dizzy. Did you drink? He took the opportunity to sniff her neck again. Ji Shenyu casually pushed his head away and held his wrist, wanting to check his pulse. She then said sarcastically, You're just being hit by a woman, and you're already acting like this. I remember that you were hit by a huge rock back in the floating mountain range, and you were still fine. I wasn't injured then, I'm a little weak now. Rong Yishenheng replied. But halfway through, he suddenly sensed something and looked behind Ji Shenyu. 8th cousin brother. Ji Shenyu did not react for a moment. What 8th cousin brother, 9th cousin brother? You have many relatives. As she said this, she seemed to have thought of something. Her body stiffened, and she turned her head. Not far behind them, there were 2 people standing. They were Rongyu Ishenlin and Ji Tianyue. They had not seen each other for a while, and Ji Tianyue had changed her clothes. She was wearing a light red dress and a snow-white cloak. Under the contrast of red and white, her small face looked even more tender. As for Rongyu Ishenlin, he was wearing a lake blue robe with wide sleeves. He looked extraordinarily elegant and handsome. The 2 of them stood there, and the scene looked very harmonious. Rongyu Ishenlin's gaze fell on Ji Shenyu. To be exact, it fell on her hand that was holding Rong Yishenheng's. She smiled faintly. Both of you, what a coincidence. It was indeed a coincidence. Fire Phoenix City was so big, and she had met them twice in such a short time. It was not an ordinary fate. Ji Shenyu silently complained in her heart. She had come to this place to hide, but she did not expect to meet so many acquaintances. Fortunately, she was dressed as a man and looked like Shenyu, so Rongyu Ishenlin and Ji Tianyue would not recognize her. She also did not plan to acknowledge them, so she only nodded at Rongyuishenlin and Ji Tianyue. Then took Rongyuishenhang's pulse. Your pulse is weak, but it doesn't look like you're seriously injured. You seem to be hungry. Didn't you have dinner? Rongyuishenhang nodded obediently. Indeed, I didn't eat. I wanted to go to the peak with Xiao Nan to admire the moon while eating. But no wonder. Ji Xinyu nodded and let go of his hand. She took out a piece of cake from her sleeve. I have a few more cakes here. Do you want to eat them first? Rong Yuetianhang's eyes lit up, and he unceremoniously pinched the cake from her hand. Yes. Brother Shen, you're so considerate. You actually prepared pastries. Could it be that you already guessed that I would come here, and specially prepared these? Ji Xinyu thought to herself. How would I know you would come here? I prepared the pastries for myself to eat while admiring the moon. However, it would be a waste if she didn't sell this favor. So she smiled and didn't say anything. Rong Yuetianheng swallowed the pastry and smiled. Delicious. Are there any more? Ji Xinyu saw him wolfing down the food, and felt that he was really hungry. Hearing his question, she immediately reached into her sleeves again. Before she could take it out, there was a slight breeze in front of her, and Rong Yuetianlan came directly in front of her. Ji Xinyu was pushed back a few steps by him, and raised her eyebrows in surprise. In the afternoon or evening. Chapter 2695. Before she could say anything, Rong Yuetianlan placed 2 fingers on Rong Yuetianheng's wrist. Are you injured? Let me take your pulse. So they were brothers. Ji Xinyu knew very well how good Rong Yuetianlan's medical skills were. If he was willing to help, it didn't matter how serious Rong Yuetianheng's injury was. Ji Xinyu took another step back, distancing herself from the brothers. She only changed her appearance, but did not change her scent. If she was too close to them, she was afraid that Rong Yuetianlan would recognize her. She turned her head and saw Ji Tianyue looking at her curiously, her big eyes sparkling under the moonlight. Big brother, why do I feel that you look a little familiar? Ji Xinyu couldn't help but touch her face. She had only changed her appearance a little, but it was still 50% or 60% similar to her original appearance. She coughed and wanted to gloss over it. Probably. I have a common face. No. Ji Tianyue continued to look at her with her head tilted, and suddenly her eyes lit up. You actually look a little like my sister Xinyu. Ji Xinyu laughed. Haha, is that so? She was about to change the topic. Rong Yuetianheng suddenly groaned. Ji Xinyu was shocked and rushed back. What's wrong? Rong Yuetianheng looked at his cousin accusingly, trying to get his wrist back. Pain, pain, pain. But his wrist seemed to be stuck to Rong Yuetianlan's fingers, and he couldn't break free at all. Ji Xinyu didn't know what kind of spell Rong Yuetianlan used to be able to make the other party wail like a ghost and howl like a wolf. Looking at the dense cold sweat on Rong Yuetianheng's forehead, it didn't seem to be an act. She couldn't bear it, this. Eighth Highness, please be gentler. Rong Yuetianlan turned to look at her and said lightly, I can't be gentle. He's seriously injured, so I have to use a heavy technique to unblock his meridians. Ji Xinyu didn't know why, but she felt that Rong Yuetianlan's gaze was exceptionally cold, and his tone was unprecedentedly cold, which made her feel a little confused. Well, he wouldn't hurt his own cousin. He was a doctor, so he had the most authority. Ji Xinyu tactfully took a step back and stopped talking. Rong Yuetianlan probably increased the strength of the technique again, and Rong Yuetianheng finally couldn't help but scream again. It hurts. Cousin, I don't want you to treat me, let go, let go. He desperately wanted to shake off the other party's hand, but he couldn't. Ji Xinyu heard his desperate cries, then looked at his deathly pale face, his dripping sweat, and his tightly clenched lips. This is probably comparable to the pain of a woman giving birth, right? Now that she thought about it, it was all because of her that he had suffered so much. Ji Xinyu felt guilty again. After thinking for a while, she found a thick and hard tree branch, and cut it into a short wooden stick. Afraid of cutting Rong Yuetianheng's delicate mouth, she even considerately peeled off the bark and handed it to Rong Yuetianheng. Here, bite it, it will hurt less. Rong Yuetianheng was biting his lips until it hurt. Ji Xinyu's short wooden stick was a timely rein for him. He hurriedly bit it and thanked her. Brother Shin, thank you. You are indeed loyal. Ah. He probably suffered another heavy blow, as he screamed again. Kacha! The short wooden stick in his mouth was bitten off by him. Ji Xinyu. When Rong Yuetianlan finally withdrew his hand, Rong Yuetianheng was already sweating profusely, and his throat was almost hoarse from all the shouting. There's still more in the afternoon. Looking for monthly votes, moi. Chapter 2696. As soon as Rong Yuetianlan let go, he rolled and crawled away, staying far away from him. Eighth cousin, do you have a grudge against me? It was so painful. He felt as if all the veins in his body had been roughly combed by an iron comb. The pain was unbearable. Rong Yuetianlan slowly clapped his hands. Check your body again, see if your injuries have healed. Rong Yuetianheng looked at him suspiciously, then closed his eyes to check his body. After a while, he opened his eyes in surprise and moved his fists and feet a few times. It's really healed. His spiritual power that had been sealed since he was injured started to flow again. Ji Xinyu also breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed that Rong Yuetianlan was really treating his cousin, and did not mean to torture him. It was just that this method was a little scary. Fortunately, he did not use such a perverted method when he treated her. Rong Yuetianheng was also a tough guy. Once he got better, he immediately became energetic. He glanced at Ji Xinyu, then looked at Rong Yuetianlan. Cousin, whose child is this? She looks so fresh. Could it be that you secretly gave birth to her in another continent? Rong Yuetianlan held the fan in his hand, and suppressed the urge to send his cousin flying. She is the youngest daughter of the South Heaven Emperor, Princess Ji Xinyu. Rong Yuetianheng was confused. She is the youngest daughter of the South Heaven Emperor? Your fiancé's younger sister? Your sister-in-law? Strange. Why didn't you bring your fiancé to admire the moon, but brought your sister-in-law? Rong Yuetianlan. He suddenly regretted that he did not use more strength when he was healing Rong Yuetianheng, and directly seal his mouth. He glanced at Ji Xinyu, but Ji Xinyu did not look at him. She was looking at Rong Yuetianheng's side in a daze, not knowing what she was thinking. Rong Yuetianlan suddenly felt a little irritated. He said faintly, my marriage with Ji Xinyu will be annulled. Ji Xinyu is not my sister-in-law. Rong Yuetianheng was stunned. You still want to annul the marriage? Didn't you say that Ji Xinyu is quite beautiful, not ugly, and has good skills? Such a wife is hard to find even with a lantern. Besides, you've delayed him for more than 3,000 years. When he turned his head, he suddenly discovered that Ji Xinyu was like a flying eagle, directly leaping onto the steep cliff. With a tap of her toes, she sped towards the peak as if she was skiing. He hurriedly took 2 steps forward. Brother Shin, where are you going? Ji Xinyu's voice came from afar, admiring the moon on the peak. Although she didn't use her spiritual energy to fly, this kind of gliding looked even more soul-stirring, and her posture was even more free and easy. Rong Yuetianheng suddenly had a competitive heart. He didn't care about gossiping with Rong Yuetianlan anymore. His figure rose and also swept up the cliff. Brother Shin, wait for me. He chased after him. Little Nan, who had been completely ignored, quickly ran 2 steps forward. Great swordsman Tianheng, I want to go too. You should just go home. Us brothers are having a gathering. A woman like you shouldn't cause any trouble. Rong Yuetianheng decisively left Xiaonan behind, and continued to chase after Ji Xinyu. Rong Yuetian stood below, and watched as the 2 of them glided all the way, and gradually disappeared into the clouds. Her eyes flickered slightly. Ji Xinyu looked very envious. Brother Rong Yue, is this the legendary brotherhood? They have such a good relationship, should we still go up? Rong Yuetianlan gripped the fan in his hand and chuckled. Let's go up. Chapter 2697. He was obviously smiling, but Ji Tianyue felt that his smile was a little strange. Just as she was about to say, it's not good to disturb other people's brothers' gathering, Rong Yuetianlan's body slowly flew up, his clothes fluttering, and he had already disappeared into the clouds in the blink of an eye. Ji Tianyue. Fortunately, she also knew how to fly on a sword. She took out a small sword, enlarged it, and stood on it to chase after him. There was a bright moon above her head. The mountain wind whistled on the mountain peak. In this season, it was actually a little cold on such an open mountain peak. Fortunately, the mountain peak was high enough. Ji Xinyue used her inner strength to fly up, and at this moment, she was sweating a little, so she didn't feel cold. Rangyushenhang, who was beside her, shivered violently. It's so cold. When he flew up just now, he didn't just use his inner strength, he also used his spiritual power. So he didn't use much strength to climb the mountain peak. In order to look handsome and free, he only wore a thin silk shirt. When the mountain wind blew, he shivered. He looked at Ji Xinyue again. Brother Shen, I know you've always done things properly and like to prepare for a rainy day. Did you bring an extra robe? Ji Xinyue rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. You've been in the Jianghu for so many years. Will you always be so cautious? Ever since she became friends with this guy, she had helped him deal with the aftermath several times. Although Rangyushenhang was the same age as her, and even a few months older than her, in Ji Xinyue's eyes, he was like a younger brother. She was never stingy with her friends. She lowered her head and began to check the clothes in her storage space. You're taller than me. My clothes won't fit you. I'll find you a bigger one. Rangyushenhang wasn't picky. It's okay. Actually, I'm just a little taller than you. Just find me a thick one and let me wear it. Just as he said this, a robe covered his head, covering his entire face. Rangyushenhang pulled the robe off his head in a flurry. I'll wear it myself. Before he finished his sentence, he suddenly choked. He looked at Ji Xinyu, who had just pulled out a robe, and had yet to hand it over. He then looked at eighth cousin, who was standing not far away. Cousin, you're here too. He then shook the robe in his hands. So you also have a spare robe. He happily put it on. Your robe is just right for me, it's even longer. Rongyue Tianheng was slightly shorter than Rongyue Tianlan. His robe was a little too long for him. Rongyue Tian's voice was cold. You're still young and you haven't grown up yet. It's not good for you to have some messy thoughts, lest it spoils your cultivation and prevents you from growing taller. Rongyue Tianheng was confused by his scolding. Ah, what kind of weird thoughts did I have? He retorted. I'm not young anymore. I'm already 3,112 years old this year. I'm already an adult. At this age, I can already marry a wife, he then proudly said. It's just that I'm very picky. A person like me must marry a peerless beauty. It's best if her martial arts are better, so that I can spar with her. Sigh, it's a pity that such good women are few and far between. I've been drifting on this continent for many years, but I haven't found a suitable one. It seems like I can only be a wild crane for the time being. He seemed to have thought of something. Ah, right, cousin. I heard that Princess Ji Xinyu is beautiful and capable, and her martial arts are high. You should have seen her, is that true? Chapter 2698. Rangyushenlin frowned slightly. Before he could say anything, Ji Tianyue, who had just flown up, said, Of course my sister is the best. Among my sisters, she is the most beautiful and has the best martial arts. She even personally picked the immortal snow lotus for my mother. Rangyushenhang's eyes lit up. This immortal snow lotus is not easy to pick. There is a fire dragon guarding it. Your sister can actually defeat the fire dragon alone and pick this immortal snow lotus. Amazing. Really amazing. He then looked at Ji Tianyue and gave her a thumbs up. Little princess, you are also quite capable. You flew up such a high mountain by yourself. I thought your cousin would carry you up. By the way, how is your martial arts? Ji Tianyue blushed a little. My martial arts are very shallow. Father doesn't let me practice fighting martial arts. No one taught me. Rangyushenhang raised his eyebrows. Your sister is so good at fighting, can't she teach you? Ji Tianyue lowered her eyes sadly. Father doesn't let my sister teach me. She can't do anything. She actually wants to teach me. Your foundation is good. It's a pity that you don't practice. Rangyushenhang's handsome face showed regret. Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. You said so too. By the way, brother Rongyue also said so. He also proposed to father that he wanted to guide me in my cultivation, and father agreed. Rangi Yushinheng was surprised and looked at his cousin. You want to accept this little princess as your disciple? Brother Rongyue doesn't accept disciples. He said that he only needs to guide me. Ji Tianyue's voice had some regret. Rangi Yushinheng looked at his cousin again and smiled meaningfully. So that's how it is. Although Rangi Yushinheng didn't have a chance to get along with his eighth cousin, he still heard some stories about him. He knew that although his eighth cousin had a reputation of being a playboy, and there were women all over the world who admired him, it was only these women who pursued him openly and secretly. He had never heard of any stories about him and any woman. He seemed to be gentle and polite to women, but in fact, he was quite indifferent and didn't like to meddle in other people's business. Even if a woman fell in front of him, he might not be willing to take the initiative to save her. For such a person to make such an exception for a little girl like Ji Tianyue, there must be some inside story. He wanted to impart martial arts to him, but he didn't want to take him in as a disciple. Could it be that eighth elder brother has fallen in love with this little girl? Eighth cousin brother's taste is so heavy. He looked at the two people standing together and suddenly felt indignant for Princess Xinyu, whom he had never met before. He glanced at his cousin. Cousin, your marriage with Princess Xinyu, are you really going to cancel it? Rong Yuetian nodded slightly. He did not look at Ji Xinyu, and only said, she and I are not fated to be together. She also wanted to withdraw, but you've delayed me for so many years. Rong Yuetian was expressionless. It's not that much of a delay. Maybe she already has someone else in her heart. Annulling this marriage is also a kind of blessing. These were his heartfelt words, but after he said them, his heart felt as if it was being squeezed by something. When they were chatting, Ji Xinyu was too lazy to interrupt, but that didn't mean she couldn't hear them. Rong Yuetian's words made her frown. Rong Yuetian was interested in her little sister. She could tell when they were drinking in the restaurant. Chapter 2699. It would be a lie to say that she didn't care at all. After all, this person was still her fiancé in name. Now that he had taken a fancy to her little sister, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. However, there was indeed a kind of love in this world called love at first sight. Perhaps Rongyue Tianlan had really fallen in love with her little sister at first sight? After all, her little sister was so cute and lovable. However, if he liked her little sister, then so be it. She wouldn't say anything. However, if he said that she, Ji Xinyu, had someone else in her heart, wouldn't that be nonsense? Since when did she have someone in her heart? She didn't even know if her so-called sweetheart was out of her mother's womb. She really wanted to refute him, but when she thought of her current identity, she shut her mouth again. When she raised her head, she saw that Rongyue Tianlan's gaze was on her face. Their gazes met, and Ji Xinyu felt that she had met him once with her current identity. He had even helped her slay the dragon and saved her once. They weren't strangers, so she smiled faintly at him as a form of greeting. However, her smile in Rongyue Tianlan's eyes seemed to be a tacit acknowledgement of his words. His gaze turned cold. He stared at her for a moment, then looked away. Although Ji Xinyu had always been careless, she could still distinguish whether other people's gazes were malicious or kind. Rongyue Tianlan's gaze towards her was unfriendly, which made her a little confused. Could it be that he was angry that she had turned around and left after slaying the dragon? However, he had also taken all the credit, alright? What else was he dissatisfied with? Ji Xinyu had never been one to stick her warm face on someone's cold buttocks. Since he was cold, she would naturally be cold too. The interaction between the four people at the back was a little subtle. Ji Xinyu deeply felt that among the four people present, she was the most scheming, and had the most capital to walk the Jianghu. Because no matter where she went, she liked to bring dry food and wine with her. Of course, the dry food she brought wasn't ordinary dry food, but some freshly preserved snacks and dishes that she had packed from the restaurant. As for wine, that was her favorite. It was the wine from the southernmost Luoshenxiang clan in the city. The wine from this clan was mellow and sweet, with a strong kick to it. After drinking a mouthful, A cooling spiciness would flow down her throat like a thread of ice, followed by warmth. In such cold weather, this type of wine was the most suitable. She had always liked the wine from this house, so she brought 2 more gourds with her when she came to admire the moon. These 2 gourds of wine were enough for her to drink alone, and she might not even be able to finish them. But now that there were 3 more, she couldn't drink alone, so she could only reluctantly take them out. Of course, she couldn't hide the dishes and wine, so she put them out as well. 4 plates of dishes and 2 plates of desserts were placed on a large rock, looking a little desolate. Ji Shenyu cast a hopeful gaze at Rongyue Tianlan. Since you have brought a beauty to admire the moon, you must have brought food as well. Please share it with us. Rongyue Tian simply shook her head. No. Ji Shenyu was speechless. She felt a little disdainful. When she was at the restaurant, she had seen him buy some snacks. But at this time, she couldn't point it out. So she turned her gaze to Ji Tianyu. Her little sister was innocent, and had always been easy to deceive, so she didn't know how to lie. Her voice was gentle. Little sister, do you have any food that you want to contribute? Ji Tianyu nodded obediently. Yes. Then she looked at Rongyue Tianlan with her big eyes. Brother Rongyue, can you take out the snacks that I bought? Chapter 2700. Rongyue Shenlin couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He glanced at Ji Shenyu and asked, You really want hers? Ji Shenyu crossed her arms and said with a faint smile, Since we're admiring the moon together, we should share our food. Of course, if you don't want to share, it's not convenient for me to share mine with you. Or the 2 of you can go over there and admire the moon. We'll go our separate ways. Ji Shenyu subconsciously felt nervous sitting with him. If she could take the opportunity to chase him away, it would be good. But she obviously miscalculated. Before she finished speaking, Rongyue Shenlin began to take things out slowly. A bag of melon seeds, a bag of peanuts, a bag of plums, a sugar doll, 2 sticks of sugar-coated haws, and a huge cotton candy. Ji Shenyu. Rongyue Shenhang's lips twitched. These are all children's snacks. Wouldn't they be laughed at for drinking and eating children's snacks? Rongyue Shenlin glanced at Ji Shenyu lightly. Can't help it. This brother Shen even wants children's snacks. Tianyu has always been generous. She won't hide anything. Ji Shenyu clenched her fists in her sleeves. He said it as if she was hiding something. She was the only one contributing in this group. The other 3 were all freeloaders. He still had the face to say that. But how to refute his words was a problem. Ji Shenyu wasn't very eloquent. She couldn't think of anything at this moment. Rongyue Shenlin looked at her tense face and was a little puzzled. Brother Shen, why didn't you ask Tianheng if you only asked the 2 of us? Maybe he brought a lot of things too. Ji Shenyu sneered and said almost without thinking. Him? He wouldn't bring anything. He only brought his mouth. I bet he didn't even bring a bag of melon seeds. This guy never liked to bring things. Every time they fought monsters together, he would come to eat her food and drink her wine. Rongyue Shenhang's eyes sparkled. He put his arm on Ji Shenyu's shoulder. Brother Shen, you know me best. You're indeed my confidant. Come, let's drink a big cup first. He picked up a wine gourd and wanted to pour it directly into his mouth. Ji Shenyu reacted quickly and snatched it away from him, then gave him a wine cup. Use this. Rongyue Tianheng looked at the wine glass in his hand, and then looked at her. He was moved. This is the wine glass I used last time, right? I didn't expect you to keep it for me. Brother Shen, you are so good to me. The wine cup in his hand was an antique treasure that he had unintentionally picked up in a black market. Its value was quite considerable. The last time he drank, he happened to have this on him, so he took it out to drink with Ji Shenyu. However, he had always been a forgetful person, so no matter how good something was in his hands, it was like floating clouds. While he was drinking, he received a letter from home, asking him to go back quickly. He ran away without saying a word. This wine cup had fallen into Ji Shenyu's hands. Ji Shenyu thought that this guy often came to drink wine with her, and didn't like to bring his own wine set. He always wanted to snatch the wine cup in her hands to use. She had taught him a few lessons, but none of them worked. So that time, She put his cup away so that this fellow could come and drink more. As it turned out, she had great foresight. Ji Shenyu praised herself in her heart. Of course, she also accepted all of Rong Yushenhang's words of gratitude. Therefore she smiled. Chapter 2701. Of course, she also accepted Rong Juishen Huan's words of gratitude. So she smiled and casually replied, "It's good that you know I'm good to you. Tonight, I'll leave the task of pouring wine to you." Rong Juishen Hung almost patted his chest. "Don't worry, leave it to me." Ji Shenyu cast a sidelong glance at him. "Brother?" This kid was getting bolder and bolder. Rong Juishen Hung laughed dryly. "It's me, your brother. Little Shen, I'm a few months older than you after all. Actually, it's not a problem for you to call me brother." Ji Shenyu glanced at him and said casually, "When you can beat me, then expect me to call you brother." Rong Juishen Hung lowered his head. "This is difficult." He poured a glass of wine and drank it desolately. This wish of his would probably be difficult to fulfill in this lifetime. "If I can beat you, will you call me brother?" Rong Juishen Lan said with a faint smile. This sentence could almost be called flirting. Ji Shenyu looked at him strangely. Was this person crazy? This was between her and Rong Juishen Huan. Wasn't his mouth a little too abrupt? "Tianheng and I are friends. Friends are just joking. You don't have to interfere anymore." Ji Shenyu also drank a mouthful of wine. "You and I can't even be considered friends?" Rong Juishen Lan's smile deepened, but there seemed to be a touch of coldness in his sparkling eyes. Was this person here to bicker with her? Ji Shenyu frowned. She felt that Rong Juishen Lan was targeting her tonight. Before she opened her mouth, Rong Juishen Hung smiled and said, "Cousin, although you've always been more outstanding than me, the relationship between Brother Shun and I, you can't compare to it. After all, this is the first time you've met. It's a little too early to talk about friendship." Rong Juishen Lan looked at Ji Shenyu again. "This is the first time we've met?" Ji Shenyu pondered for a moment, then finally said, "It's only the second time." Rong Juishen Heng's eyes widened. "So you've met before when?" "Brother Shen, I've never heard you mention this." Ji Shenyu glanced at him. "It's just a small matter, and there's no need for me to report my whereabouts to you, is there?" Rong Yuetian Huan scratched his head. "That's not what I meant. I just thought that my cousin is so outstanding. No matter what, you would mention him to others. Besides, when you two met just now, I couldn't tell that you two had met before." Ji Shenyu's head was starting to hurt. She rubbed her forehead and said, "I'm not as nosy as you are. Besides, he's just someone I met by chance. There's no need for me to tell him." After he finished speaking, Ji Shenyu felt that the surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped. The breeze on the mountain peak was as cold as a small knife. She subconsciously hugged her arms and inadvertently raised her head. She saw Rongyue Tianlan looking at her with narrowed eyes. Her expression was somewhat unfathomable. She couldn't even tell if she was happy or angry. Ji Shenyu had always lived in the eyes of others. If she wanted to live a carefree life, she couldn't care less about the eyes of others. She had to treat them as floating clouds. After living in the midst of trouble for so long, some people had become extremely sensitive, while others had trained their nerves to be thicker than steel. She didn't care about those messy eyes at all. Ji Shenyu obviously belonged to the latter, so she glanced at Rongyue Tianlan inexplicably, then turned her gaze away. She didn't care at all. Chapter 2702. Therefore, she glanced at Rongyue Tianlan inexplicably, then looked away. She was too lazy to guess what Rongyue Tianlan was feeling at the moment. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her for a moment, then suddenly said, "Since there are 4 people drinking, where are the other 2 cups?" Ji Shenyu frowned slightly. "Well, I didn't know there would be so many people, so I brought my cup and his with me." She wasn't someone who often invited people to drink. Rongyue Tianlan's fingers clenched slightly in his sleeve. "It seems that your relationship is really good." Rongyue Tianheng smiled so widely that his teeth could be seen. He put his arm on Ji Shenyu's shoulder. "Of course. We are friends who have gone through life and death together. The kind who will never leave each other." Ji Shenyu's lips twitched. This brat's words today were really annoying. However, what he said couldn't be considered wrong. They were indeed friends, and had gone through thick and thin together a few times. It wouldn't be appropriate to refute this at this time. So she smiled and didn't say anything. She picked up a cup of wine and said, "Come, let's toast to our friendship." She took the opportunity to push his wolf claws down. Rongyue Tianhuan naturally clinked his cup with hers, then drank it in one gulp. He smacked his lips and turned to show off to Rongyue Tianlan. "Eighth cousin, brother Shen and I are not only close friends, even our interests and hobbies are similar. For example, this wine. I like this Luotian incense. Coincidentally, brother Shen also likes this. Don't you think this is fate?" Ji Xinyu's hands trembled at his words. This brat spoke as if he was possessed today. What did he mean by fate? Wasn't that used to describe husband and wife or lovers? However, could family and friendship also be used as a metaphor? Ji Xinyu couldn't make up her mind. Although Rongyue Tianhuan had the reputation of being proficient in both literature and martial arts, he wasn't very accomplished in literature. Occasionally, he would use idioms wrongly. So even if he used the wrong example now, it was understandable. Rongyue Tianlan's lips curled up slightly. He didn't say anything. A cup appeared between his fingers, and he poured himself a cup of wine. He took a sip, frowned, and said faintly, "This wine doesn't suit my taste, it's too bland." Rongyue Tianhuan was not convinced. "This wine is strong enough, it has a lot of aftershocks. You freeloader, don't be picky. If you have the ability, bring out a better wine." Ji Shenyu rubbed the space between her eyebrows. Now is not the time to argue. He didn't bring anything with him. Where would he get good wine? Don't talk about such trivial matters. Before he could finish his sentence, he suddenly shut his mouth, and his gaze fell on Rongyue Tianlan's fingers. Like a magic trick, Rongyue Tianlan conjured a jar of wine from her fingertips. He peeled off the clay seal on the jar, and a strong and sweet wine aroma immediately overflowed. Ji Xinyu loved wine, so she could tell the quality of the wine just by smelling it. Now that she smelled it, she felt refreshed, and all the pores on her body seemed to open up. Good wine. Two simple words seemed to be unable to describe the quality of this wine. Ji Xinyu had been drinking wine for so many years, but compared to this wine, all those wines seemed unbearable. Rongyue Tianhuan almost reached out to grab the wine jug. Good wine. Eighth cousin brother. Why did you only bring out such good wine now? Come, fill it, fill it. He put the wine cup in his hand directly under the wine jug. Chapter 2703. Rongyue Tianlan took back the jug and said indifferently, "Don't you like to drink this Luotian xiang? My wine may not be to your taste, so you shouldn't drink it." Rongyue Tianheng was speechless. Should he take back what he just said? Rongyue Tianlan's eyes fell on Ji Xinyue. Would you like to try it? Ji Xinyue said straightforwardly, "Okay." Rongyue Tianlan smiled. Don't you only drink one type of wine? Ji Xinyue raised her eyebrows. When did I say I only drink one type of wine? I like all good wines. Rongyue Tianlan smiled and poured for her. Please taste it. Rongyue Tianheng came over with a drooling face. I'm also a wine taster, eighth cousin. Let me taste this wine too. Rongyue Tianlan didn't give him any face. You're a wine taster? Then can you smell what this wine is made of? If you can name 3 types, I'll treat you to it. Rongyue Tianheng sniffed hard and tried to guess. There's sorghum? Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. You can't even guess the main ingredient. How can you call yourself a wine taster? Rongyue Tianheng was not convinced. You just let me smell it, how can I guess? I have to taste it. He then turned to Ji Xinyue for help. Brother Shen, don't you think so? This. Ji Xinyue coughed, a little ashamed of Rongyue Tianheng's white eyes. A wine taster could at least smell most of the ingredients. Rongyue Tianheng was probably the only one who couldn't smell a single type, and still called himself a wine taster. She looked up and saw Rongyue Tianlan looking at her with a smile. If you can name 3 types, you can also drink this wine on his behalf. Ji Xinyue's fingertips turned the wine cup. Really? I'm not lying. Ji Xinyue smiled. What if I can name 5 or 6 types? Rongyue Tianlan paused. I'll just give you that jug of wine. Even the world's famous wine tasters could only name 5 or 6 types after tasting the wine, and that was under the circumstances of being extremely knowledgeable about wine. But now, she was able to identify 5 or 6 different types just by smelling them. That was impossible. Ji Xinyu laughed again. That's a good condition. Then listen carefully. The main ingredient of this wine should be a type of rice that grows in extremely cold places. Only the first half of the embryo is taken. As soon as she said this, Rongyue Tianheng shook his head with a smile. How can a place of extreme cold produce rice? And only the first half? Isn't this just messing around? Before he could finish his words, he felt his mouth tighten, as if someone had sealed it. Rongyue Shenlin looked at Ji Xinyu, a light flashing in her eyes. Continue. Ji Xinyu did not stand on ceremony, and continued. The wine made from this rice is extremely cold, so we need to use something produced in a very hot place to cool it down. If my guess is correct, this wine should have been mixed with the juice of tourmaline grass. The taste of tourmaline grass is bitter, so we also need to use a fruit to press it down. This fruit is called the fruit of mystery, and it needs to be picked in the morning when it has been washed with frost. Ji Xinyu spoke with fervor and assurance. Not only did she name 6 types of raw materials in one breath, she also mentioned the characteristics of these 6 types of raw materials and the necessary conditions to harvest them. As soon as she finished speaking, the peak fell into silence. Rongyue Tianheng's eyes darted around. He wanted to open his mouth, but could not speak. After a while, Ji Tianyue interrupted. Brother Rongyue, is he right? Chapter 2704. Rongyue Tianlan looked at Ji Xinyu with a complicated gaze, and a hint of passion flashed through his eyes. He nodded slowly. Not bad. You're right. I admire you. He was good at brewing wine, and usually had time, so in order to brew a jar of good wine, he would work hard and run around, just to brew the best wine. The wine he brewed was one of the best in the Tianxi continent, and no one could compare to it. Even Di Zun often came up with all kinds of reasons to drink his wine, thinking of ways to get his wine. But Di Zun was a lazy person. He only liked to drink, but was too lazy to taste the wine, and was too lazy to guess the ingredients used in the wine. To him, wine was enough as long as it tasted good. As for the ingredients, in Di Zun's eyes, they were like floating clouds. So Rongyue Tianlan would occasionally feel that his family's good cabbage had been eaten by a pig, a regret that he couldn't find a soulmate. It was even more so in the Fanning continent. There were even fewer people who knew about wine. He didn't expect Ji Xinyu to be an expert in this field. She could say so much with just a sniff, and so accurately. It was simply impressive. Ji Tianyu was also excited. Brother Rongyue, I want to drink too. I want to try good wine too. Rongyue Tianlan didn't refuse, and casually conjured another cup, wanting to fill it for her. Ji Xinyu frowned slightly, and reached out to stop him. She's still a child. Are you really letting her drink? Rongyue Tianlan then reacted, and raised his hand to rub Ji Tianyu's head. Children can't drink, you should just eat. Ji Tianyu pouted. Can I just try 1 cup? Not even 1 cup. Ji Xinyu said directly. Children were not yet fully developed. Once they drank, it was easy for the alcohol to enter the brain and cause poisoning. If it wasn't done well, the child might become stupid from drinking. Ji Xinyu was used to protecting her sister, so she naturally didn't want her to drink. Rongyue Tianlan was also good at medicine, so he naturally understood this. Now that he reacted, he naturally wouldn't let Ji Tianyu drink. Ji Tianyu pouted even higher, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't recognize her sister, and thought that the person in front of her didn't want her to drink the wine she already had. Ji Xinyu couldn't bear to see her cry. She thought for a moment, then took out a bottle from her storage space. Come Tianyu, drink this. This one suits you. It was a jar of fruit honey. Ji Tianyu took a sip, and her eyes lit up. She liked to drink this. Thank you, Brother Shen. This suits my taste very well. Ji Xinyu's voice was gentle. If you like it, then drink more. She had originally bought this bottle for her sister. She had just taken it out in advance. Rongyue Tianlan was someone who kept her word. and directly gave the jar of wine to Ji Xinyu. In Ji Xinyu's hands, there would naturally be good wine for everyone to drink. Rongyu Tianheng could finally drink it. Rongyu Tianheng drank the wine he liked. Naturally, he didn't blame Rongyu Tianlan for sealing his mouth. The four of them sat on the four sides of the big rock, tasting the wine and admiring the moon. Ji Tianyu was also happy. She had been locked up in the palace for a long time, and this was the first time she was gathering with these people of the Jianghu. She felt that they were living very freely, and her big eyes were filled with envy. The only thing that made her a little depressed was that she couldn't get a word in most of what these people were talking about. There were many things that she didn't understand. Sitting at the side, it seemed that she could only drink fruit juice and eat. Chapter 2705. She was unwilling to be left out and suddenly suggested, "Brother Rongyue, Brother Shen, can I dance for you?" No one present objected. Rongyue Tianlan even took out a flute and said, "I'll accompany you." Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. She hugged his arm and kissed him on the cheek. "I knew Brother Rongyue treats me the best." Ji Shenyue was stunned. She didn't expect her little sister to be so open. It seemed like they had only known each other for a day. Could this be the legendary love at first sight? Falling in love at first sight? But wasn't her little sister a little too open? After all, Rongyue Tianlan was still her fiancé. As long as the engagement was not cancelled, he was still her real brother-in-law. Was it really good to be so passionate about a brother-in-law whom she had only known for a day? Moreover, she was still an underage child. What was she doing when she was her age? She was suppressed by all kinds of rumors and felt inferior. Every day, she hid in a corner of the palace like a mouse. When she saw people whispering, she thought they were gossiping about her. At that time, she only faintly felt that she had such an unreliable fiancé. She didn't even know what fiancé meant. She only knew that it was this fiancé who pushed her into hell. She hated him so much from then on. She was especially disgusted with the word fiancé. At that time, she didn't know what the relationship between a man and a woman was. Now that her little sister was doing this, did she already know about the relationship between a man and a woman? Or did she treat Rongyue Tianlan as a man who could be close to like her father, a child's intimacy? Rongyue Tianlan was also slightly stunned. With his martial arts, if he didn't want her to kiss Ji Tianyue, the sneak attack wouldn't have succeeded. If his face could be kissed so easily, then his face would have been covered in layers and layers of lipstick marks by now. When Ji Tianyue pounced over, he seemed to want to block, but suddenly remembered something. His arm froze again. After a short pause, Ji Tianyue succeeded in stealing the kiss. Rongyue Tianlan glanced at Ji Xinyue. She was in a daze. He didn't know what she was thinking. She looked at Ji Tianyue and seemed to have some doubts. Rongyue Tianheng laughed out loud. "What a fiery little princess. Little Tianyue, do you like this brother Rongyue? He's your brother-in-law." Ji Tianyue's face was as red as a tomato. She pursed her lips and said crisply, "Brother Rongyu doesn't like my sister Xinyu. They will break off the engagement. So he is not my brother-in-law." Ji Xinyu's hand that was holding the wine glass paused for a moment. Although what her little sister said was true, but hearing her say it now, she still felt that it was a little jarring. In the imperial palace, she doted on her younger sister the most, but her younger sister actually said such words in front of strangers. She glanced at Rongyue Tianlan, then looked at her younger sister with a smile. How did you know that they would break off the engagement? She didn't remember telling her younger sister. As for Rongyue Tianlan, he shouldn't be that gossipy, right? Ji Tianyue lowered her head slightly. "I heard it from my sister and father personally. They said that they will go to the marriage pillar to cancel the engagement in a few days. So it can't be fake." Ji Xinyue. So Lil Sis had eavesdropped. After saying those words to imperial father, because she was not in a good mood, she took a long stroll outside before returning to her own courtyard. In the end, she saw Rongyue Tianlan and her little sister getting along well in her own courtyard. Chapter 2706. If that was the case, Then her younger sister had used the butterfly to look for her elder sister. But she had actually gone after Rongyue Tianlan? She looked at Ji Tianyue with a complicated gaze. Her little sister was so young, yet she already had such a scheming mind? Rongyue Tianheng didn't expect that his joke would lead to Ji Tianyu's confession to his eighth cousin. He slightly choked and subconsciously frowned. Little Tianyu, is your sister Xinyu good to you? Sure. Ji Tianyue answered without hesitation. But what you're doing now is equivalent to stealing your sister's man. That's not very kind of you. Ji Tianyue blinked her eyes. They're about to break off the engagement. The only thing missing was a ceremony. That doesn't count as stealing big sister's men, right? This. Rongyue Tianheng rubbed his nose. He felt that what Ji Tianyue said made sense, but he subconsciously felt that something was wrong. He paused. Then what do you like about Brother Rongyue? Ji Tianyue thought for a moment and counted with her fingers. Brother Rongyue is handsome and capable. He is a dragon slayer hero. He also knew a lot of skills, and these skills were all top-notch. I fell in love with her the moment I saw her. Rongyue Tianheng had always known that his eighth cousin brother was attracting girls, but he didn't expect that he would even attract underage girls. He looked at Rongyue Tianlan. Rongyue Tianlan seemed to be quite shocked as well. She held the wine cup in her hand for a long time without drinking. He frowned slightly. He wanted to say something, but he didn't. Rongyue Tianheng thought for a moment. Little Tianyu, have you discussed this matter with your sister Xinyu? Ji Tianyue shook her head. There's no need to discuss it. My sister dotes on me a lot, and is willing to give me anything. As long as I want it, she will give it to me. Even if she doesn't want to break off the engagement. As long as Rongyue Gij doesn't like her and likes me, she will give him to me without a second word. This theory was truly valiant. Rongyue Tianheng couldn't help but argue with her. What if she doesn't let you? She also really likes you, Brother Rongyue. After all, they are a proper fiancé and fiancée. It's engraved on the marriage pillar. Ji Tianyue's mouth was slightly agape, as if she had never thought of this question. He was stunned for a moment before he added, there's no such thing as if. She has already discussed this with Imperial Father. Even if it's agreed, it might not be true. Didn't they agree on their marriage back then? Wasn't she going to break off the engagement now? I'm only asking you. What will you do if your sister doesn't let you? Are you going to back out? Rongyue Tianheng pressed on. Ji Tianyue was obviously anxious. Her pretty face was flushed red, and she couldn't say anything for a while. Rongyue Tianlan, who was at the side, finally spoke. His voice was cold and emotionless. Her sister may be eager to give up this marriage. Tianheng, don't make things difficult for a child here. Ji Tianyue was originally about to cry, but when she heard Rongyue Tianlan's words, her small face immediately glowed. Even Brother Rongyue said that my sister would give in. Therefore, there's no mistake. Rongyue Tianlan pondered for a moment and said, Tianyue, you are still a child. It is too early to think about these things. When you are older and more mature, it will not be too late to think about these things. All right, let's go dance. If we don't dance, the moon will be leaning to the west. Brother Rongyue, I'm not young anymore. I'm 520 years old this year. When you and my sister Xinyu were engaged, she was only a little more than a year old. Ji Tianyue didn't give up. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.